This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never told this story outside my family before. It's been 18 years since it happened, but sometimes at night, I still check the locks 3 or 4 times before I can sleep. I'm 25 now, but I was only 7 when it happened. It was late November, just before the first big snowfall of the season. My dad, Arthur, my older brother, Thomas, who was 13 at the time, and I took our tabby cat Whiskers with us for a weekend trip to a small cabin in the Bavarian Alps. My mom had passed away when I was 4, so it was just us guys. Dad thought it would be good for us to get away from everything for a while. The cabin belonged to one of my dad's old army buddies. It was this small 2-story wooden place surrounded by pine trees. Pretty isolated, probably 2 miles to the nearest neighbor. When we arrived on Friday afternoon, it was already getting dark, and the temperature was dropping fast. Dad got a fire going while Thomas and I unpacked. I remember being excited about staying in the cabin. It was rustic but cozy, with wooden walls and this old stone fireplace that made the whole place smell like smoke and pine. The only thing I wasn't thrilled about was my bedroom. All 3 of us had separate rooms, but mine was on the 2nd floor at the end of the hallway, furthest from Dad and Thomas. The room had this single uncurtained window that looked out on this creepy old oak tree. Its branches were all twisted and gnarled, and in the dark, they cast these weird shadows across the wall. That first night was fine. We had dinner, played some board games, and went to bed early since we planned to hike the next day. Saturday went well too. We explored the area, had snowball fights, and Dad taught us how to identify animal tracks in the thin layer of snow that had fallen overnight. The second night, that's when it happened. I've always been a bit of a night owl, even as a kid. Around 2 in the morning, I was still awake, reading comics with my flashlight under the covers. Whiskers was curled up next to me, purring away. The cabin was completely silent except for the occasional creak of the wood settling and the wind outside. Then I heard it. A soft tap on my window. At first I didn't think much of it. We were surrounded by trees after all. I figured it was just a branch hitting the glass. I went back to my comic, but then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was different. It wasn't random like a branch would make. It had a pattern to it, like knuckles rapping on glass. I froze. My heart started racing as I stared at the window from my bed. The moonlight was bright enough that I should have been able to see if there was anything outside, but all I could make out was darkness. Then the whisper came. "Open up, lad. It's me, Daddy." I felt like my blood turned to ice. That wasn't my dad's voice. It wasn't anyone's voice I recognized. It was raspy and thin, like someone trying to whisper but also trying to be heard through the glass. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Whiskers, who had been sleeping peacefully beside me, suddenly perked up. Her ears went flat against her head, and she started making this low growling sound I'd never heard before. "Let me in, Diffro. It's freezing out here." Diffro. That was what my dad called me sometimes. It was short for Different One, because I was the only one in the family with blue eyes. But nobody else knew that nickname. Nobody. "Come on, son. I just want to cuddle." The way he said cuddle made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Whiskers jumped off the bed and arched her back, hissing at the window. That's when I finally found the courage to look. I turned my head slowly toward the window, still gripping my flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. There was a face pressed against the glass. Even in the dim light, I could see his expression, this horribly wide grin that stretched across his face unnaturally. His teeth looked too white, too big for his mouth. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring right at me. He didn't look like any normal person. He looked wrong. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, he slowly lifted his hand. There was something in it, a pocket knife with the blade extended. He pressed it against the window and dragged it down, making this awful screeching noise that sent shivers down my spine, all while maintaining that terrible grin. Finally, I screamed. I screamed louder than I'd ever screamed in my life. The man's expression changed instantly. The grin vanished, replaced by a look of pure anger. His eyes narrowed, and he started scratching at the glass more frantically. I heard footsteps thundering down the hall, and my bedroom door burst open. My dad came rushing in with his hunting rifle in his hands. Thomas was right behind him, holding his cricket bat. Dad flipped on the light and rushed to the window. The man outside seemed startled by the sudden light and the appearance of my dad. His pale face, God, it was so pale, almost bluish in the moonlight, registered something like fear. He staggered backward, nearly falling off whatever he was standing on to reach my second-floor window. Dad yanked the window open and pointed the rifle out, but the man was already scrambling away, disappearing into the tree line. Dad shouted something after him, but I couldn't make out the words over the sound of my own sobbing. Thomas rushed to my side, wrapping his arm around me while Whiskers continued to hiss at the window. Dad checked the window frame, running his fingers along the glass where the man had scratched it. "Stay with your brother," Dad told Thomas. "I'm going to check the rest of the house." Dad went through every room, checking windows and doors. He came back to report that everything was locked up tight, but he dragged a heavy dresser in front of my bedroom door just in case. None of us slept that night. Dad sat by the window with his rifle. Thomas stayed next to me, and Whiskers refused to leave my side, her tail puffed up to twice its normal size. When morning finally came, Dad called the local police. They arrived about an hour later. Two officers who didn't seem particularly concerned until they saw the scratches on my window glass. Long, deliberate lines that couldn't have been made by anything but a blade. Then they found the footprints in the snow below my window and a crude stack of logs and branches the man must have used to climb up. The strangest thing was that there was only one set of footprints leading to the cabin, none leading away. It was as if the man had approached the cabin and then vanished. The police followed the tracks back to the main road about half a mile away, but found nothing else. We packed up and left that same morning. The whole way home, I kept thinking about how that man knew my nickname, how he knew to pretend to be my dad, how he seemed to know exactly which window was mine. The police never caught him. They took our statements, but without any real leads, the case eventually went cold. Dad installed heavy security systems in our house after that. For months afterward, I slept in Thomas's room. I couldn't bear to be alone at night. Whiskers became my constant companion after that. She was already a sweet cat, but after that night, she barely left my side. She lived to be 14, and I swear she checked the windows every night until the day she died. Now I do it myself. I'm in therapy now, and it's helped a lot. But some things stay with you forever. The sound of that knife on glass, that unnatural grin, the way he said my nickname in that horrible whisper. But what still haunts me the most, what keeps me up some nights even all these years later, is the question I can't answer. How did he know which window was mine? How did he know my nickname? And why, out of all the cabins in those woods, did he come to ours? I still don't have answers. All I know is that something evil was out there in those woods, something that wanted in. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear tapping on my window, and that whispered voice saying, "Let me in, Diffro. I just want to cuddle." Story 2. I've never told this story online before. I think I was just too scared for years, and even now I'm typing this with shaking hands. I still get nightmares about it. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat hearing those voices again. This happened back in 2005 when I was 15. My mom was raising me alone after my dad left us when I was 9, and money was always tight. She worked 2 jobs, but it was never enough, so I got a part-time job at this seaside fair and bowling alley after school and on weekends. It wasn't much, just minimum wage stuff like running the ticket booth, helping out in the arcade, or cleaning up. But every little bit helped, you know? I had started dating this boy, Jake, who lived in this fancy neighborhood about 40 minutes away. His family had money, like serious money. His house was in one of those gated communities with perfect lawns and giant houses. It was a whole different world from our cramped 2-bedroom apartment. That night in October, I had finished my shift at 7 and planned to visit Jake afterward. His mom had promised to drive me home around 10:30 since my mom was working late. It was a Friday night, and I was excited to just hang out and watch movies or something. Getting there meant taking 2 buses, the number 18 to the city center, then transferring to the 42 that went out to the richer suburbs. The first bus ride was totally normal. A bunch of people heading home from work, some teenagers going out for the night. I remember feeling pretty good listening to music on my iPod mini, which was a huge deal for me. I'd saved up for months to buy it. I got off at the main station downtown and waited for the 42. It was already getting dark, and I remember checking the time on my phone over and over because I didn't want to be late. The second bus finally pulled up around 8:15. It wasn't very full to begin with, maybe 8 or 9 people scattered around. I sat near the middle, by the window. I always liked looking out at the city lights, watching neighborhoods change as we drove from the busy downtown to the quieter outskirts. Something felt off almost immediately, though. The driver kept looking at me in his rearview mirror. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but he definitely kept staring. He was older, maybe in his 40s, with this weird patchy beard and a baseball cap pulled low. I tried to ignore it and just kept my headphones in, even though I turned my music down so I could stay alert. As the bus made its stops, people started getting off. An elderly couple, a woman with shopping bags, a guy in a business suit. With each stop, the bus got emptier, and my anxiety grew stronger. My stomach was in knots by the time we reached the outskirts of town, where the streetlights became fewer and the road stretched dark between neighborhoods. Soon there were only 3 people left on the bus. Me, the driver, and this other guy sitting in the front. He looked around 30 and was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. I hadn't paid much attention to him before, but now I noticed how he kept turning around to look at me. We were approaching the terminus, the last stop before the route that would take me near Jake's neighborhood. It was this isolated little bus station at the edge of town, basically just a covered bench in the middle of nowhere. Fields on one side, some industrial buildings on the other. No houses nearby. The bus pulled into the terminus, and instead of continuing on the route, the driver turned off the engine. Then he switched off the interior lights, leaving us in near darkness except for some dim safety lighting. 15-minute break, he announced, and my heart dropped. This wasn't normal. I'd taken this route before, and there was never a break here. The guy in the hoodie stood up and walked to the front, and I realized with horror that he and the driver knew each other. They were talking quietly, but I could hear enough to know they were friends. They both got off the bus, leaving me alone inside. I immediately grabbed my phone to call my mom, but there was no signal. Nothing. I tried Jake next, but still nothing. We were in a dead zone. Through the windows, I could see the driver and his friend standing just outside, smoking. They were talking and laughing, occasionally glancing back at the bus. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but what I did catch made my blood run cold. Younger than the last one. Probably still a virgin. Got the place all set up. Won't remember anything anyway. They were talking about conquests and laughing about girls who were too drunk to remember anything. One of them mentioned something about having the perfect spot where no one would hear anything. I was trapped, completely trapped. I looked around frantically for an emergency exit, but I knew that even if I could get out, I was in the middle of nowhere. Where would I run? It was dark, I didn't know the area, and we were surrounded by empty fields and industrial lots. For a moment, I considered hiding under the seats, but they'd find me instantly. I thought about breaking a window, but that would alert them immediately. I was shaking so hard I could barely think straight. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes, they flicked their cigarettes away and started walking back toward the bus. I quickly pretended to be texting on my phone, trying to look casual while my heart was pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. They got back on, and the driver stayed, standing, looking down the aisle at me instead of sitting in his seat. "Not many people come out this far at night," he said. His voice was different now, fake friendly in a way that made my skin crawl. "Especially pretty young girls like you." I mumbled something about visiting a friend, keeping my eyes down. "What's your name, sweetheart?" the guy in the hoodie asked, sitting sideways in the front seat so he could stare at me. "Emily," I lied, not wanting to give them my real name. "Emily," the driver repeated, drawing it out in a way that made me want to throw up. "How old are you, Emily?" 18, I lied again, trying to make myself sound older, more confident. They both laughed like I'd said something hilarious. "You don't look 18, the hoodie guy said. "I'd say 16, tops." "Got a boyfriend, Emily?" the driver asked, taking a step down the aisle toward me. I nodded quickly, clutching my phone tightly, even though it was useless. "Yeah, I'm going to his house now. He's expecting me. His dad's a police officer," I added, the lie spilling out desperately. The hoodie guy stood up and started walking slowly toward me. "A cop's daughter, huh? That's interesting." I meant his dad is a cop," I stammered, realizing my mistake. "So you're a liar," the driver said, no longer pretending to be friendly. "I don't like liars." The hoodie guy was only a few seats away from me now. "Are you a virgin, Emily?" he asked bluntly. "You look like a virgin." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up with terror. I just sat there, frozen, as he came closer. The driver was still blocking the front of the bus. There was no way out. "Answer him," the driver snapped. "It's a simple question." "Leave me alone," I managed to whisper. "Please, I just want to go to my friend's house." "We're just being friendly," the hoodie guy said, now standing right next to my seat. "Making conversation during our break. Nothing wrong with that, is there?" He sat down in the seat across the aisle from me. The smell of cigarettes and something else, alcohol maybe, was overwhelming. He was so close I could see a scar on his chin, the stubble on his cheeks. Maybe Emily would like to come have a drink with us after my shift, the driver suggested, taking another step closer. We've got a cool place nearby, very private. I can't, I said, my voice trembling. My friend is waiting. My mom knows where I am. Another lie, but I was desperate. Your mom thinks you're at work, doesn't she? The hoodie guy said, and my blood went cold. How could he know that? Had they been watching me? Just then, a crackle came from the radio in the driver's cab. A dispatcher's voice broke through the silence. Bus 42, what's your status? You're showing stationary at terminus for 8 minutes. Please confirm continuation of route. The driver's demeanor changed instantly. He cursed under his breath and hurried back to the front. Yeah, just a quick break. Continuing now, he responded into the radio. He started the engine and flipped the interior lights back on. The sudden brightness was almost shocking. The hoodie guy gave me one last long look before reluctantly returning to his seat at the front. The bus pulled away from the terminus, continuing on its route. Those 10 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. I sat rigid in my seat, watching the road signs, counting the seconds until we'd reached the stop near Jake's neighborhood. When we were about a block away from my stop, I reached up with a shaking hand and pressed the bell. The sound seemed deafening in the silence. As the bus slowed to a stop, I stood up on legs that felt like jelly. The driver pulled the lever to open the doors, and I could feel both of them watching me as I walked down the aisle. See you around, Emily, the hoodie guy called as I stepped down onto the sidewalk. We know where you work, the driver laughed. Maybe we'll come bowling sometime. I didn't look back. The moment my feet hit the pavement, I started running. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, not stopping until I reached the gates of Jake's community. I punched in the code with shaking fingers and kept running all the way to his house. Jake's mom opened the door to find me collapsed on their porch, hyperventilating and sobbing. I couldn't even speak at first. She brought me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and called my mom right away. When I finally managed to tell them what happened, Jake's mom wanted to call the police immediately. My mother arrived 20 minutes later, frantic with worry, and also insisted we report it. But I begged them not to. I was terrified the men would find out, that they'd come after me. They knew where I worked, after all. In the end, they reluctantly agreed, but my mom made me quit my job at the bowling alley the next day. For months afterward, I jumped at every sound, checked over my shoulder constantly, and couldn't take public transportation alone. I still can't ride a bus by myself without panic rising in my throat. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering what would have happened if that dispatcher hadn't called when she did. I never found out who those men were. I never knew if they had done this before or if they did it again to someone else who wasn't as lucky as I was. It's been years now, but I still hear their voices sometimes in quiet moments. See you around, Emily. A permanent reminder to always, always trust my instincts. Story 3. I still can't talk about what happened at Eagle Island without getting goosebumps. It's been 3 years, but the memory is burned into my brain like a brand. I've tried therapy. I've tried convincing myself it was just our imaginations running wild. But I know what I saw that night. We all did. It was the summer after our junior year, and my buddy Zeke had invited me, Connor, Mike, and Adam up to his family's cabin for a week of fishing, drinking, and just being stupid teenagers away from our parents. The cabin was on this small island called Eagle Island in northern Canada, about a 3-hour drive from Zeke's house, and then another 20-minute boat ride. The place was seriously remote, like no electricity remote. We had a generator for essentials, but mostly relied on propane lamps after dark. The cabin itself was pretty basic. 3 bedrooms, a main living area with a wood stove, and a screened porch facing the lake. The nearest neighbors were at least a quarter-mile away through dense forest, and we couldn't even see their lights at night. That isolation was part of the appeal. We could be as loud as we wanted, drink Zeke's dad's beers without worrying about getting caught, and just do whatever 17-year-old guys do when left unsupervised. The first 3 days were exactly what we'd hoped for: swimming in the lake, fishing off the dock, cooking our catches over the fire pit near the shore. The 4th day was when everything changed. We'd spent most of the afternoon swimming and cliff jumping from this 20-foot rock ledge about 100 yards down the shoreline. By evening, we were tired but in great spirits. After dinner, we grabbed some beers and headed down to the fire pit by the water's edge. It was that perfect time of night. The sun had just set, leaving this deep blue twilight that made everything feel calm and peaceful. The lake was completely still, like glass reflecting the first few stars appearing overhead. We were just shooting the shit, talking about school and girls and whatever else, when Adam suddenly stopped mid-sentence and squinted out toward the water. "What's that?" he asked, pointing about 30 yards offshore. At first, I didn't see anything. The light was fading fast, and the lake surface was getting darker by the minute. But then I saw what he was pointing at, what looked like a small, pale object bobbing just at the waterline. "Probably just a loon," Mike said, taking another swig of his beer. But it didn't move like a loon. It didn't move at all, actually. It just floated there. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out more details, and my stomach dropped. It looked like a head, a human head, with long black hair spreading out around it. The face was turned slightly away from us, so I couldn't make out features, but it was unmistakably head-shaped. "That's not a bird," I said, standing up for a better look. "That looks like a person." Zeke grabbed the flashlight we'd brought down and shined it toward the object. The beam didn't quite reach, but it illuminated the water enough that we could all see it wasn't creating any ripples. Whatever it was seemed to be just sitting there, perfectly still, as if suspended. "Maybe it's a log or something," Zeke suggested, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "We should check it out," Adam said, already moving toward the small rowboat tied to the dock. Mike grabbed his arm. "Dude, no way. It's almost completely dark. If it's someone in trouble, we should call for help." "With what?" Adam challenged. "Cell phones don't work out here, and the radio's back at the cabin." We stood there debating what to do for maybe 5 minutes, and during that time, none of us took our eyes off the object in the water. That's how I know what happened next wasn't just my imagination. The thing moved. Not like it was being pushed by a current or wind. There wasn't any. It moved deliberately, slightly closer to shore. No splash, no ripples, just closer than it had been before. "Did you guys see that?" I whispered, not wanting whatever it was to hear me. They all nodded slowly, and I noticed Zeke's hand shaking as he held the flashlight. "Let's go back to the cabin," Mike suggested, his voice tense. "Like right now." None of us argued. We gathered our stuff quickly, doused the fire with lake water, and hurried up the path to the cabin. I couldn't help looking back over my shoulder as we left, and I swear the pale object had moved even closer to shore. Back inside, we locked the doors and tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Zeke suggested it might be a prank from kids at one of the other cabins on the island, though we all knew there weren't any other teenagers around. Adam thought maybe it was some kind of animal carcass, while Mike suggested it could have been a floating piece of driftwood that just happened to look human-shaped in the dim light. I didn't offer any theories. I was too busy trying to shake the feeling that whatever we'd seen had been watching us. We decided to distract ourselves with cards and more beer, sitting around the kitchen table with several propane lamps glowing. For a while, it worked. We played poker, told stupid jokes, and managed to push the incident aside. Around 1 in the morning, we were all pretty tired and buzzed, so we decided to call it a night. The cabin had 3 small bedrooms. Zeke took his parents' room, I took the guest room, and Mike and Adam shared the bunk room. I fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the day's swimming and the adrenaline crash after our scare. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, but the cabin was completely dark and silent, except for the ambient sounds of the forest outside. What woke me wasn't a noise, but a sudden, inexplicable certainty that something was wrong. I lay perfectly still, listening. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the wind in the trees and the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the lake. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the dirt outside, moving around the perimeter of the cabin. These weren't animal footsteps. They were too measured, too intentional. Something was circling the cabin, pausing occasionally as if listening or looking in the windows. I wanted to get up and wake the others, but fear paralyzed me. I couldn't even call out. The footsteps completed a circuit and then approached the front steps. One by one, I heard the old wooden stairs creak under weight. Whatever it was had reached the porch. I heard it test the door handle, a soft, subtle rattle that sent ice through my veins. Thank God we'd locked it. The handle stopped moving. For maybe 30 seconds, there was complete silence. Then the footsteps retreated back down the stairs and seemed to move off toward the forest. I lay there for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, straining to hear any sound of the visitor returning. Just as I was starting to think maybe I'd imagined it all, a scream shattered the silence. It came from the bunk room where Mike and Adam were sleeping. I bolted upright, finally breaking free of my paralysis, and rushed toward their room. Zeke emerged from his room at the same time, looking disoriented and terrified. Before we could reach the bunk room, the door flew open and Mike came tearing out, wild-eyed and gasping for breath. Adam was right behind him, looking equally terrified. "There's someone outside," Mike choked out. "There was a face at the window." "That's impossible," Zeke said automatically. "Those windows are like 8 feet off the ground." Mike grabbed Zeke by the shoulders. "I know what I fucking saw. I woke up and there was a face pressed against the glass, staring right at me." Adam was nodding frantically. "I saw it too when Mike woke me up, just for a second before it disappeared." "What did it look like?" I asked, my mouth dry. Mike shook his head, struggling to find words. "It was wrong, pale, too pale, and its eyes, they were just dark holes. And it had this long black hair plastered to its head, like it was wet." The description hit me like a punch to the gut, the head we'd seen in the water. I told them about the footsteps I'd heard and how something had tried the front door. As I spoke, I could see the color draining from their faces. "We need to get out of here," Adam said, "right now." "It's the middle of the night," Zeke protested, though without much conviction. "We can't just—" "I am not staying here another minute," Mike cut him off. "Whatever that thing is, it's trying to get in." We argued briefly about what to do, but deep down, we all knew we were leaving. We grabbed only the essentials, our phones, wallets, the boat keys, and a couple of flashlights. Nobody suggested splitting up, even to gather more belongings. We moved as a tight group to the front door. Zeke, whose hand was steadiest, held the flashlight while I unlocked the door. We peered out into the darkness of the porch, seeing nothing unusual. Slowly, we made our way down the steps and into the yard, flashlight beams darting nervously in all directions. That's when I spotted them, footprints in the soft dirt around the cabin. Barefoot human prints, but something was off about them. They were too long, the toes too spread out, and they formed a perfect circle around the entire cabin, just as I'd heard. Another set led from that circle up to the front steps, and a third set disappeared into the woods in the direction of the lake. "Oh God," Adam whispered, following my gaze. Without another word, we sprinted for the dock where Zeke's dad's motorboat was tied. I've never been so grateful for anything as I was when that engine roared to life on the first try. We didn't even untie the rope properly. Zeke just slashed it with his pocket knife and gunned the motor, sending us skimming across the black surface of the lake. As we pulled away from the island, I forced myself to look back. The cabin sat dark and silent on the shore, looking so normal it was almost possible to believe we'd all just freaked ourselves out over nothing. Then I saw it. A figure standing at the water's edge where our fire pit had been. Even in the darkness, I could make out its unnaturally elongated silhouette. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin gleamed pale in the moonlight, and its long dark hair hung in wet ropes around what I could now see was a featureless face, just indentations where eyes should be. It raised one grotesquely long arm and opened a hand with fingers that seemed to stretch like tentacles. I turned away, unable to look anymore, and didn't say a word to the others about what I'd seen. I think they were deliberately not looking back anyway. We made it to the mainland and spent the rest of the night huddled in Zeke's truck in the parking lot of the marina, too afraid to sleep. When morning came, we drove straight back to town and made up some story about one of us getting sick to explain our early return. Zeke's dad went back to the cabin the following weekend. He found the cut rope and the footprints, which by then had hardened in the dirt. He was angry at first, thinking we'd had some kind of party that got out of hand. But when we stuck to our story about seeing someone prowling around the cabin, he seemed to accept it, assuming some local troublemaker or transient had scared us off. He never experienced anything unusual there himself. The cabin is still in their family, and his parents use it regularly. But none of us, not me, not Zeke, not Mike or Adam, has ever gone back. We don't talk about that night much, but when we do, our stories haven't changed. We all saw the same things. We all felt the same terror. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just mass hysteria, that we worked each other up after seeing something ordinary in the lake. But then I remember those footprints circling the cabin, and that figure by the shore with its two long limbs and fingers. And I know that whatever was watching us from the lake that night wasn't human. It wasn't anything that should exist in our world, yet it does exist on a small island in northern Canada, waiting in the water for the next group of teenagers to sit around a fire by the lake shore. Story 4. Astor. This happened a little over 2 months ago, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. Physically, I'm mostly healed, but mentally, that's a different story. I have to share this because maybe it'll stop someone else from making the same mistake I did. I worked at the Fox and Hound, this pub about 20 minutes from my apartment. That night, I had a particularly exhausting 10-hour shift. We were short-staffed, it was unusually busy for a Wednesday, and this group of businessmen kept ordering complicated cocktails right before last call. By the time I finished cleaning up, it was almost 2 in the morning, and I was completely drained. Normally, I stick to the main roads on my drive home, but that night I was so tired, I just wanted to get back as quickly as possible. There's this network of winding back roads that cuts through the forest area between the pub and my neighborhood. It shaves about 8 minutes off the drive. I've taken it a handful of times before, but usually during daylight hours. The roads out there are narrow and poorly lit. No street lights, just my headlights cutting through pitch blackness with dense forest on both sides. I remember thinking how creepy it looked, but also feeling fairly safe inside my locked car. I had the heat running because it was freezing outside, probably in the mid-30s, and I was playing some podcast to keep myself awake. I'd been driving for maybe 5 minutes on these back roads when my headlights caught something in the middle of the road about 50 yards ahead. At first, I thought maybe it was a fallen branch or something. But as I got closer, I realized what it was, a baby car seat, just sitting there right in the center of my lane. I slammed on the brakes, coming to a stop about 15 feet from it. My heart immediately started racing. Why would there be a car seat in the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning? The rational part of my brain was screaming, "Trap!" But then this other voice in my head was saying, what if there's actually a baby inside? It was one of those gray infant seats with the handle on top, and it had what looked like a little blanket draped over part of it. I sat there for what felt like forever, engine running, just staring at it. I tried to see if I could maneuver around it, but the road was too narrow with ditches on both sides. The whole time, I kept having this internal argument with myself. Everything I've ever read online about roadside safety was telling me not to get out of the car. But what kept eating at me was, what if someone had accidentally left their baby? What if someone had been in an accident? What if some poor infant was freezing to death while I just sat there, too scared to check? I hate myself for it now, but I put the car in park, left it running with the headlights on, and got out. The cold hit me immediately. I was just wearing my work clothes, black pants, and a thin button-up shirt. I didn't even grab my jacket from the back seat. That's how focused I was on checking the car seat. I approached slowly, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice sounded so small in the vast darkness of those woods. When I got to the car seat, I hesitated before looking inside. My hands were shaking, partly from cold and partly from fear. I leaned down and pulled back the little blanket, and nothing. It was empty. Just an old dirty car seat with a ratty blanket. The relief hit me like a wave. No abandoned baby. Thank God. But that relief lasted about 2 seconds before turning into dread. Because if there was no baby, then why was a car seat in the middle of the road at 2 in the morning? That's when I heard it, a branch snapping in the forest to my left. I whipped my head around, trying to peer into the darkness beyond my car's headlights. "Hello?" I called again, already backing toward my car. "Is someone there?" I never even saw who grabbed me. 1 second I was moving back, toward my car, and the next, someone had their hand clamped over my mouth from behind, so tight I could hardly breathe. I tried to scream, but could only make this pathetic, muffled sound. I kicked and thrashed, but whoever had me was much stronger. I could smell alcohol and cigarettes on their breath. More figures emerged from the forest. 3 or 4 of them, I couldn't tell exactly. They were laughing, like this was all some big joke to them. One of them said something like, "Told you someone would stop." Another replied, "Jackpot, she's alone." I tried fighting harder, managed to bite the hand over my mouth, which earned me a painful smack to the side of my head. Stars exploded in my vision. I remember being dragged toward the tree line, away from my car, and the panic that surged through me was unlike anything I've ever felt. They hit me again, harder this time, and I felt my knees give out. I was still conscious but dazed, unable to put up much of a fight anymore. Someone rifled through my pockets, taking my phone and wallet. I could hear them laughing about finding my car keys. One of them was talking about my car, saying something about finally getting out of this shithole town. I managed to look up at them, trying to see their faces, but they were just dark silhouettes against the glow of my headlights. I think they were wearing hoodies pulled tight around their faces. The one who seemed to be in charge stepped closer, and I could make out that he was young, late teens maybe. He crouched down and said something about me being lucky they just wanted the car. Then there was another blow to my head, much harder this time, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was face down in what felt like bushes and stinging nettles, well off the road. It was still dark, but that pre-dawn darkness where you can just start to make out shapes. My entire body hurt. My head was throbbing. My arms and legs were scraped up from being dragged, and I could taste blood in my mouth. It took me a minute to realize what had happened. My car was gone. I was alone on a back road in the middle of nowhere, in the cold, with no phone, no wallet, and no way to call for help. I tried to stand up, but immediately felt dizzy and fell back down. On my second attempt, I managed to get to my feet, though I had to lean against a tree to stay upright. Looking around, I could barely recognize where I was. They'd dragged me pretty far off the road and down an embankment. I knew I had to start walking. I was freezing, injured, and terrified they might come back, but staying put wasn't an option. I tried to orient myself. I knew which direction I'd been driving, so I started walking that way, figuring I'd eventually hit a main road or find a house. Every step was agony. My right ankle was either sprained or badly twisted, and I could feel blood trickling down my face from a cut on my forehead. The cold was getting worse as my adrenaline wore off. I kept hugging myself and stopping to catch my breath, fighting through waves of dizziness. I don't know how long I walked. It felt like hours, but was probably only about 45 minutes. Eventually, the forest thinned out, and I started seeing houses in the distance. I was approaching the outskirts of this little village called Millfield that's a few miles from my neighborhood. By the time I stumbled into the village, I must have looked like something out of a horror movie. I remember a newspaper delivery guy stopping his car and asking if I was okay, but I could barely form coherent sentences at that point. He helped me to the local emergency center. It's not a full hospital, just this small 24-hour urgent care place. I collapsed as soon as I got inside. The next thing I remember is waking up on a bed with a doctor shining a light in my eyes and a nurse putting an IV in my arm. They told me I had a mild concussion, numerous contusions, a sprained wrist, and mild hypothermia. They were also concerned about potential internal bleeding, so they transferred me to the actual hospital in the next town over. The police came while I was at the hospital. I told them everything I could remember, which wasn't much, just that there were several attackers, they were young, and they stole my car. The police seemed skeptical at first, especially when I told them about the car seat. One officer actually asked if I'd been drinking that night. I was furious. I'd just been assaulted and left for dead, and they were questioning whether I was making it up. 2 days later, while I was still in the hospital, a different officer came to see me. They'd found my car abandoned at a gas station about 40 miles away. The inside was trashed, reeking of alcohol and weed, with empty beer cans everywhere. They also found fingerprints that matched some local teenagers already in the system for petty crimes. Within a week, they'd arrested the people responsible, 5 teenagers between 16 and 19 years old. The ringleader was this 18-year-old who had a history of theft and assault. When questioned, he admitted they'd been drinking in the woods and decided it would be funny to put the car seat in the road to see if anyone would stop. They hadn't specifically targeted me. I was just the unfortunate person who happened to come along. I was released from the hospital after 3 days. My parents came to stay with me for a couple of weeks to help out. Physically, I'm mostly recovered now. The cuts and bruises healed, my concussion symptoms subsided, and I can walk normally again. But mentally, I'm a wreck. I can't drive at night anymore. I have nightmares about hands grabbing me from behind. I left my job at the pub because I couldn't handle the late shifts. I've started seeing a therapist, which helps a little. But there are still days when I can barely force myself to leave my apartment. What haunts me most is how easily it could have been worse. If they'd been more violent, if they'd had weapons, if they'd decided to do more than just steal my car, I might not be here typing this, all because I stopped for a stupid car seat that every logical part of my brain was telling me was a trap. The teenagers are facing charges now, assault, theft, all that. But knowing they're being punished doesn't take away what happened. Nothing will erase those moments of terror or the feeling of helplessness I experienced. I'm sharing this as a warning. That little voice in your head telling you something isn't right, listen to it. No matter how good your intentions are, no matter how much you want to help, sometimes the safest thing is to keep driving and call for help once you're somewhere secure. I learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Don't make the same mistake I did. Story 5. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened to me that night. Not even my therapist knows everything. I'm only writing this now because I saw something on the news about Clearwater Cove's boardwalk renovation, and all those memories came flooding back. It's been 12 years, but I still get chills thinking about it. I was 15 when it happened. My family lived on Surf Avenue, literally a block from the shoreline. My dad got the house for a steal during the housing crisis, and we thought it was the luckiest break ever. In the summer, tourists packed the streets, and the whole town buzzed with energy. But come September, everything changed. Like someone flipped a switch, and suddenly the town was a ghost of itself. I was on the cross-country team at Clearwater High, and Coach Davis was always pushing us to train year-round. Champions aren't made in season, he'd say. So even in the off-season, I'd go for runs after dinner. My parents weren't thrilled about me running at night, but they knew I stayed on the boardwalk where the streetlights kept things visible. Plus, no one was around in October, just empty souvenir shops with metal gates pulled down and the occasional local walking their dog. That Wednesday night in October started like any other. It was around 8:30 when I laced up my running shoes. Mom was grading papers in the living room. She taught English at my school, and Dad was watching some history documentary. "Be back by 9:15, Marcus," Mom called out as I headed for the door. "And take your phone." The air had that distinct fall beach smell, salt mixed with decaying seaweed and a slight chill. The boardwalk stretched ahead of me, empty except for a couple walking far in the distance. The wooden planks creaked under my feet as I started my usual route. I had my house keys in the pocket of my running shorts. Dad was super strict about locking up. He'd grown up in Chicago and never quite shook his city paranoia. The keys were on this dorky keychain he'd given me for my birthday, a little silver surfboard with our address engraved on the back, In case you lose them, someone can return them. I'd rolled my eyes when he gave it to me, but I used it anyway. I'd been running for about 20 minutes when it happened. I was on the stretch of boardwalk that passes by the abandoned amusement park, the one that closed down years ago but the town never demolished. The only sounds were my breathing and the distant crash of waves. I reached into my pocket to adjust my keys, which were jangling annoyingly when they slipped from my fingers. I still remember that sickening moment, watching them fall in slow motion between the cracks of the boardwalk planks, the metallic clink as they hit something below. Gone. Shit, I muttered, stopping immediately. I knelt down and peered between the planks. It was pitch black down there. The spaces between the boards were maybe 2 inches wide, enough for keys to fall through, but not enough to reach my hand in. I knew I was screwed if I went home without those keys. Dad would lose it, and the lecture about responsibility would last for days. Plus, there was our address on that stupid keychain. The thought of someone finding them and knowing where we lived made me uneasy, so I made what was probably the dumbest decision of my life. I decided to climb down under the boardwalk to retrieve them. At the edge of the boardwalk, where it met the beach, there was about 3 feet of clearance. I lay on my stomach and shined my phone's flashlight underneath. The space looked disgusting. Beer cans, food wrappers, and tangles of seaweed everywhere. The tide was out, leaving wet, packed sand. I could see footprints and what looked like little crab holes. I checked my watch. 9:05. I still had time to get home before Mom started calling. I lowered myself down, dropping the last foot onto the damp sand. The smell hit me immediately. Rotting seaweed, stale beer, and something else I couldn't place. Something animal-like. My phone's flashlight seemed pathetically weak in the vast darkness. The boardwalk loomed above me, creating a ceiling of wooden planks stretching into blackness. I tried to orient myself, figuring out approximately where I'd been standing when the keys fell. Moving forward in a crouch, I swept my light across the ground. Water had pooled in some areas, reflecting the beam back at me. Something scuttled away from the light, probably a crab. My heart was already pounding harder than it did during my hardest runs. After a few minutes of searching, I started to panic. The keys weren't where I thought they'd be. I moved deeper under the boardwalk, away from the edge where I'd entered. The ceiling got lower, forcing me to hunch more. The darkness felt thicker somehow, like it was pushing against my light. I realized I needed a better way to mark where I'd been standing on the boardwalk above. Looking at the planks above me, I had an idea. I sat down, untied my right shoe, and pulled out the lace. Standing, up again, I poked the lace through a crack between the boards, leaving part of it hanging down so I could see it. That's when it happened. As soon as the lace dangled through, something yanked it hard from above. The lace disappeared through the crack. I froze. Someone was up there. Someone had pulled my shoelace. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. It could have been kids playing a prank, I told myself. But at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday in October, when the boardwalk had been completely empty, logic told me to get out immediately, to forget the keys and just go home. But then I remembered. Our address was on that keychain. If someone found those keys, they'd know exactly where we lived. I had to find them. I continued my search, moving in a wider circle, sweeping my phone light across the sand. That's when I heard it, a shuffling sound, somewhere in the darkness ahead of me, like feet dragging through sand. "Is someone there?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. The shuffling stopped, then I heard it again, but but from a different direction, and then again from somewhere else. It sounded like there were multiple somethings moving around me. My hand shook, making the flashlight beam bounce wildly. I turned to head back to where I'd entered, but I'd lost my bearings. Which way was out? Every direction looked the same, just darkness broken by wooden pillars supporting the boardwalk. I picked a direction and started moving, faster now. The shuffling sounds followed me. No, they surrounded me, coming from multiple directions at once. My breathing came in short gasps. I was fully panicking now. I bumped into one of the wooden support pillars, stumbling backward. My light swept across the sand and caught something, a glint of metal. My keys. I lunged forward, snatching them up. Relief flooded through me for just a second until I felt it. Something ice-cold wrapped around my ankle. Fingers with long, sharp nails that dug into my skin. I screamed, kicking wildly. My foot connected with something solid. I heard a wet, gurgling sound, and the grip loosened. I scrambled away on all fours, my hands slipping in the wet sand. One of my fingernails bent backward painfully as I clawed my way toward what I hoped was the edge of the boardwalk. I saw light ahead, street lights filtering through. I half crawled, half ran toward it, scratching my back on the low boards above me. Something behind me hissed, an actual hiss, like an animal. I didn't look back. I burst out from under the boardwalk, scrambling to my feet on the beach. I ran like I'd never run before, barefoot on one foot, shoe on the other, keys clutched so tightly in my hand they left marks. I didn't stop until I reached our front door, fumbling with the lock, hands shaking violently. I burst inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My parents looked up, startled. "Marcus, what on earth?" My mom stopped mid-sentence when she saw me, covered in sand, missing a shoe, scratches on my arms and legs. Something's under the boardwalk," I gasped between breaths. It grabbed me. Dad immediately called the police while Mom examined the marks on my ankle. 4 distinct scratches, deep enough to draw blood, with a 5th mark from what could only be a thumb, a handprint, an inhuman handprint with nails that had pierced my skin. The police came and took a report, but they found nothing when they checked the boardwalk. "Probably homeless people," the officer suggested. "They sometimes camp under there. You're lucky you weren't robbed." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt those cold fingers wrapping around my ankle. I kept thinking about that hiss. Not human, not animal, something in between. Dad had the locks changed the next day. We all tried to move on, to pretend it was just a scary encounter with some beach vagrant. 3 days passed. The scratches on my ankle were healing, turning to scabs. Then, on Sunday morning, I went to get the newspaper from our front step. There, perfectly centered on our welcome mat, was my missing shoelace, coiled in a tight spiral, like a message, like a promise. We installed a security system that afternoon, motion sensor lights, cameras, the works. Nothing else happened after that. No break-ins, no signs anyone was watching our house. But I never ran at night again. I quit the cross-country team. I couldn't even walk on the boardwalk in broad daylight without feeling sick. My parents still own that house, though they rent it out now. I moved across the country for college and never moved back. Sometimes I wonder if the families who vacation there, who laugh and eat ice cream on that boardwalk, have any idea what lurks beneath it. Sometimes I wonder if the thing that grabbed me that night is still down there, waiting. I've tried researching local legends about Clearwater Cove, looking for stories similar to mine. I found nothing concrete, just vague mentions of disappearances over the years. People who went for late-night walks on the beach and never came back. To this day, I sleep with my closet light on. I can't stand to be in complete darkness. And whenever I hear footsteps overhead, like in my apartment when my upstairs neighbor walks around, I freeze, listening for that shuffling sound, expecting at any moment to feel cold fingers wrap around my ankle again. The worst part? Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can smell rotting seaweed and stale beer in my bedroom, hundreds of miles from any beach. Story 6. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks. I'm not normally one for ghost stories or supernatural stuff, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm still trying to make sense of everything that happened during my time at Calstead General, and I thought sharing might help me process it. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. I started working as a nurse at Calstead General about 7 months ago. It's this ancient red brick hospital in a small Scottish town that feels like it's been frozen in time since the 70s. When I first got the job, I was just happy to find work close to my mum's place after moving back from Edinburgh. The pay wasn't great, but beggars can't be choosers, right? From day one, I knew this place was different. The building itself is a proper mess, flickering lights that never get fixed, peeling paint in the corridors, and this thick ivy growing up the walls outside like it's trying to pull the whole place down. The equipment is so outdated that half the time we're improvising workarounds just to get basic tasks done. But I figured these would be my biggest challenges. God, I was so naive. It was about a month into the job when I first heard them whispering. I was at the nurses' station filling out charts when I overheard Maggie and Jean, two nurses who'd been there since the Stone Age, huddled in the corner, talking in hushed tones. "She's back then," Maggie was saying. "Betty in radiology said she saw her by the service stairs on Tuesday. And Malcolm swears his coffee went ice cold the second he set it down in room 218, John replied. "It's always the same when she returns." When they noticed me listening, they clamped up immediately. I asked them what they were on about, and Maggie just gave me this look, part pity, part warning. "The shadow girl," she finally said. "She comes and goes, but she's never really left." I laughed it off, of course. "Right, the hospital ghost. Every hospital's got one, haven't they?" Jean didn't smile. "This isn't like your urban legends, Thomas. The girl's been here longer than any of us. Some say she died of TB in the 40s when this was still a sanatorium. Others think she fell down the service stairwell. Either way, she never left." I rolled my eyes and went back to my charts. I've never been one for ghost stories, and I figured it was just the old guard trying to rattle the new guy. Standard workplace hazing, nothing more. 2 weeks went by, and I'd almost forgotten about their shadow girl. I was working nights, which I actually preferred. Fewer administrators breathing down your neck, and the patients are usually asleep. I was doing my rounds, checking vitals on a post-op patient in room 216, when I heard a loud crack from the hallway. I jumped and rushed out to find a clipboard lying on the floor about 6 meters from where it should have been hanging outside room 218. The clip was bent, and there was actually a small dent in the plaster wall opposite. It looked like someone had flung it with incredible force. I glanced up and down the empty corridor. Not a soul in sight. The night was dead quiet, except for the distant beeping of monitors and the hum of the ancient fluorescent lights. Something cold slithered down my spine as I picked up the clipboard. I checked for strings, wires, anything that could explain how it flew off its hook with such violence. Nothing. I told myself it must have been precariously balanced, maybe vibrations from a slamming door somewhere else in the building. But deep down, I knew that didn't explain the force behind it. I mentioned it to Anna, one of the few nurses my age, during our handover. She just nodded like I'd confirmed something she already knew. Room 218, she said matter-of-factly. That's one of her favorites. I wanted to dismiss it, but the incident stuck with me. I started noticing other small things. Items moving slightly between shifts, cold spots in otherwise warm rooms, the occasional feeling of being watched when I was alone in the medication room. It was about 3 weeks later when I had my second major encounter. I'd stepped out for a quick cigarette around 2 in the morning. Bad habit, I know, but night shifts are stressful. When I came back in through the side entrance, I caught a glimpse of something moving at the end of the restricted hallway that leads to the old wing. It was a child, a little girl with dark hair, maybe 7 or 8 years old, walking barefoot down the corridor. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown, the kind they probably would have given patients decades ago. My first thought wasn't ghost, but lost visitor. Sometimes kids wander off when visiting relatives, though at 2 in the morning it seemed unlikely. "Hey!" I called out. "You can't be down there, it's restricted." She didn't turn around, just kept walking slowly toward the service stairwell at the end of the hall. I followed her, walking faster now. "Hello? Are you lost? Where are your parents?" As I reached the stairwell door, she simply vanished. 1 second she was there, the next, gone. The door to the stairwell was locked with one of those old-fashioned key locks. I tried the handle just to be sure, but it wouldn't budge. There was nowhere else she could have gone, no side rooms, no other exits. I stood there for what felt like ages, the hair on my arms standing straight up, my breath forming little clouds in the suddenly freezing air. That's when I knew. I'd seen her, the shadow girl. I didn't tell anyone about that incident. I was still trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks after hearing all those stories. But the third encounter, that's the one I can't explain away. It happened about a month ago. I was caring for Mr. Faulkner, a lovely old gent in his 80s who was in palliative care, terminal cancer. He'd been with us for about 2 weeks, and we all knew he didn't have much time left. I was checking his morphine drip around midnight when I noticed his eyes kept drifting to the empty chair in the corner of the room. "You all right, Mr. Faulkner?" I asked him. He smiled weakly. "Can you tell her to stop kicking? Her legs? The noise is distracting." I followed his gaze to the empty chair. "Who, Mr. Faulkner?" "The little girl," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She's been sitting there for the past hour. Dark hair, pale little thing. Keeps swinging her legs and hitting the chair. Bit rude, if you ask me." A chill ran through me, but I kept my face neutral. "I'll have a word," I said, playing along with what I assumed was a morphine-induced hallucination. I walked over to the empty chair, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that I gasped. It was like walking into a freezer. Right where the girl would be sitting, if there was a girl, the air was ice cold. Mr. Faulkner nodded approvingly. "Thank you. She's stopped now." As I backed away, the cold spot followed me for a step or two before dissipating. Mr. Faulkner's eyes widened slightly, looking past me. "It's all right," he whispered. "She's gone now." He died peacefully in his sleep 3 hours later. That was when I finally broke down and talked to Anna about everything I'd experienced. We were in the cafeteria during a rare quiet moment on our shift, and I half expected her to think I was losing my mind. Instead, she just nodded and stirred her tea. Everyone who stays at Calstead long enough meets her eventually, she said. Some more than others. She seems to choose certain people. But why? I asked. What does she want? Anna shrugged. Some think she's lost, doesn't know she's gone. Others think maybe the hospital was the last place she felt safe. My gran worked here in the 60s, and she said the girl was already a legend back then. I've tried researching the history of Calstead. It was originally built in the late 19th century as a tuberculosis sanatorium before being converted to a general hospital after the war. Records from that time are spotty at best, and I haven't been able to find any specific mention of a young girl dying in the circumstances described by the staff. Last week, we all got the news that Calstead General is finally being demolished next year. They're building a new facility on the edge of town with modern equipment and proper funding. Everyone's celebrating, but I can't help wondering about her. What happens to the Shadow Girl when they tear down these walls? Will she finally move on, or will she be trapped in the rubble? Does she even know she's dead? The strangest thing happened just last night. I was working a late shift and found myself alone in the medication room. I felt that familiar chill, that prickle of being watched. When I turned around, she was standing there, clear as day for just a second, before fading into a dark silhouette, and then nothing. She looked sad, not scary or malevolent, just lost and profoundly sad. I've put in for a transfer to the new hospital once it opens. I tell myself it's for the better equipment, the improved conditions, the chance to work somewhere that doesn't smell of damp and old cleaning products. But the truth is, I don't know if I can spend another year in these halls, being watched by a little girl who doesn't know she's gone. Sometimes at night, I still hear the faint sound of small feet running down an empty corridor, or catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. The other nurses say you get used to it, that the Shadow Girl is just part of working at Calstead. Some even leave little trinkets in room 218, a small toy, a sweet, like offerings. But I can't shake the feeling that she's trying to tell us something, that there's a reason she's still here, trapped between worlds in a crumbling old hospital that's about to be reduced to dust and memories. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if she'll follow us to the new building, if those of us who've seen her have somehow been marked by her presence, if perhaps she's not tied to the building at all, but to the people who acknowledge her existence. I guess I'll find out soon enough. Bye tomorrow. Story 7. I've spent 35 years trying to make sense of what happened that summer day. I still wake up some nights feeling phantom tendrils wrapping around my ankles, and I can't bring myself to swim in any body of water, not even a swimming pool. My sister Elle feels the same way, though we rarely discuss it anymore. What's the point? No one ever believed us except our grandmother, and she's been gone for 20 years now. It was the summer of 1988, and Elle and I had just turned 8 years old. We lived in a small village in rural England, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. Our village had once been truly rural, but by the time we were children, development had started creeping in. New housing estates were popping up, and the old farmland was shrinking away, but there were still plenty of wild spaces for us to explore. Our mother loved taking us on nature walks. She was an amateur botanist and taught us the names of plants, flowers, and trees. That day in late July was particularly hot, and Mum decided we would collect leaves, interesting stones, and wildflowers for our nature collection. We packed sandwiches, juice boxes, and wore our matching denim shorts and pink t-shirts. Ella and I were identical twins, and Mum still dressed us the same, much to our annoyance. The morning was perfect. We followed the path along the old forest edge, collecting acorns and interesting pebbles, pressing flowers between the pages of Mum's guidebook. By noon, we had ventured further than usual, reaching a part of the river I'd never seen before. The water looked different here, darker, deeper, with tall reeds growing along the edges. "Can we wade in the water, Mum? It's so hot," Elle begged, already slipping off her trainers. Mum looked hesitant. "Just near the edge, girls. No going in past your knees, understand? And hold hands." We nodded, eagerly, rolling up our shorts as high as they would go. The water felt heavenly against our hot skin, cool and refreshing. The riverbed was soft with mud and small stones that squished between our toes. I remember perfectly the moment everything changed. We were about 10 feet from the shore, holding hands as promised, when I felt something brush against my calf. I thought it was just a bit of riverweed, but then it happened again. A gentle touch, almost like fingers trailing across my skin. "Elle," I whispered, "something touched me." She looked at me with wide eyes. "Me too. Something's moving under the water." We both looked down. The water was too murky to see clearly, but there were long, dark green weeds flowing beneath the surface. Except they weren't flowing with the current, they were moving against it, toward us. "Mom!" I called out, trying to sound calm but failing. "There's something weird in the water." She looked up from her guidebook. "It's just reeds, Lily. Don't be silly." But these weren't just reeds. As I watched, they began to curl upward, twisting around themselves like fingers intertwining. Ella saw it too, and we both started shuffling backward toward the shore. That's when I felt it, a distinct tug on my ankle. Not harsh, but purposeful, like someone gently trying to get my attention. I looked down again and froze. The weeds had wrapped around both my ankles, thin green tendrils that looked like hair floating in the water. They weren't tight enough to hold me in place, but I could feel them, cool and slippery against my skin. "Elle," I whispered, my voice shaking, "are they around your legs too?" She nodded, face pale. "They're pulling, Lily, like they want us to stay." We both yanked our legs free and splashed toward the shore, scrambling out of the water. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "The weeds tried to grab us," I told Mum, pointing back at the water. She sighed and closed her book. "Girls, weeds don't grab people. They probably just got tangled around your legs in the current." "No, Mum, they moved by themselves," Ella insisted. "They were wrapping around our legs on purpose." "And they were swaying like hair," I added. "Long, green hair." Something flickered across Mum's face then. Not fear exactly, but a brief shadow of unease. She glanced at the river, then quickly packed up our things. "That's enough exploring for today. It's getting late." It wasn't late at all, barely past 1 in the afternoon, but we didn't argue. Neither of us wanted to stay near that river a minute longer. The walk home was quiet. Elle and I kept looking back over our shoulders, half expecting to see something emerging from the water. Nothing did, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. When we got home, our grandmother was sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, knitting. She took one look at our faces and set her needles down. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before Mum could stop us, we blurted out the whole story. The weeds that moved like hair, how they had wrapped around our ankles, the tugging sensation. I expected Gran to laugh it off like Mum had, but instead, she went very still. Her eyes darted to Mum, who was shaking her head slightly, then back to us. "Come inside, girls," she said quietly. "I want to tell you a story." Mum made a noise of protest. "Mother, don't. They're already frightened." "They should be frightened," Gran replied. "Knowledge is protection." We sat at Gran's feet in the living room while she settled into her armchair. Mum hovered in the doorway looking worried. "Have you ever heard of green hair?" Gran asked us. We shook our heads. "I'm not surprised. It's an old story, one that's nearly been forgotten. But when I was a girl, everyone in the village knew about her." Gran leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Around 1912, there was a beautiful young woman who lived in this village. Her name was Eleanor Maddox, and she had the most gorgeous long blonde hair that reached all the way to her waist. She was engaged to a young man named Thomas, who was sent to fight in the Great War, what you know as World War I. I glanced at Elle, who was listening with wide eyes, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. "Thomas was killed in France," Gran continued. "When Eleanor got the telegram, something broke inside her. She spent days walking along the riverbank, the same river you were in today, just weeping and talking to herself. People tried to help her, but she pushed everyone away." Gran paused, glancing at Mum, who had her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Then one night in the dead of winter, Eleanor walked into the river wearing her white nightgown. She'd tied rocks to her pockets. She wanted to die." "Mother, please," Mum interrupted. "This is too much for them." "They need to understand," Gran insisted. "They felt her today." A chill ran down my spine at those words. Felt her? The weeds? "Her body wasn't found until spring, when the water level dropped," Gran went on. "And when they pulled her out, her once golden hair had turned green, dark green like river weeds. It was so tangled with the actual weeds and river plants that they couldn't tell where her hair ended and the plants began. The weeds had grown through her hair, anchoring her to the riverbed all those months." Ella made a small, frightened sound. I reached for her hand. "The locals started calling her Green Hair. They said her spirit never left the river. Some claimed to see her standing on the shore at dusk, a weeping figure in white. Others said they saw what looked like a body floating just beneath the surface, with long green hair streaming behind it. But most common were the stories of swimmers feeling something like hair wrapping around their ankles, trying to pull them down." "That's what happened to us," I whispered. "The weeds felt like hair." Gran nodded. "The part of the river where you were today, that's where they found her body. They say that's where she's strongest." "That's enough," Mum said firmly. "You're scaring them with old nonsense. That part of the river has always had lots of weeds, that's all." "Then why did you look worried when they told you?" Gran challenged. "You remember the stories too, Margaret." Mum didn't answer. Instead, she told us to go wash up for dinner and shot Gran a look that clearly said they'd discuss this later. That night, Elle climbed into my bed. We lay awake for hours, whispering about what Gran had told us. "Do you think she's real?" Elle asked. "Green hair? I don't know," I admitted. "But something grabbed us today. You felt it too, right?" Ella nodded against my shoulder. "It wasn't just weeds, Lily. Normal weeds don't move like that." "Gran said Eleanor wanted to die because her fiancé died," I said. "But what if she regrets it now? What if she's lonely down there?" "You think she wants company?" Ella's voice trembled. "Maybe that's why she reaches for people. She doesn't want to be alone anymore." We both shivered and pulled the blankets tighter around us. The next morning, Mum made us promise not to go near that part of the river again. We agreed readily. She also made us promise not to spread Gran's ghost story around the village. "People will think we're raising you on superstition," she said. But I couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor Maddox with her green hair. That afternoon, while Mum was busy in the garden, Elle and I snuck into Gran's room. "Gran," I asked, "is the story about green hair really true?" She set aside her book and patted the bed beside her. "Come here, both of you." We climbed up next to her, and she put an arm around each of us. The story of Eleanor Maddox is true. She was a real person who drowned herself in that river. Whether her spirit remains there, she sighed, I can't say for certain. But I've lived in this village my entire life, and I've heard too many stories like yours to dismiss them all. Has anyone else ever been taken? Ella asked hesitantly. Gran was quiet for a moment. There was a boy when I was about 12. He went swimming alone and never came back. They found him downstream, caught in fallen branches. People said there were weeds wrapped all through his hair and around his wrists, like he'd been tied up. I felt sick. Does Mum know about that? Yes, that's why she's so upset about me telling you the story. She's always been practical, your mother. Doesn't like to acknowledge that there are things in this world we can't explain. Why did the weeds let us go? I whispered. Gran squeezed my shoulder. Perhaps she only wanted to say hello, or perhaps she knows you're too young. Either way, promise me you'll stay away from that part of the river. We promised, and we kept that promise. For 35 years, neither Elle nor I have set foot in any part of that river again. Development has changed the area dramatically now. The spot where we felt those weeds has been redirected and contained with concrete banks as part of a flood prevention scheme. The wild reeds are gone, replaced with manicured parkland. But sometimes, when I drive past it on rainy days, I swear I can see a pale figure standing by the water's edge, her long green hair blowing in the wind. Ella moved to the city years ago, partly to get away from the memories. I stayed, though I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe to keep an eye on the river. Maybe because some part of me is still trying to understand what happened that day. All I know is that every time it rains heavily, I check the local news. I'm always afraid I'll see a story about someone disappearing near the water. So far, it hasn't happened again. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if Eleanor is still down there, waiting. If the concrete and development have merely trapped her, made her angry. I wonder if she's patient enough to wait for the right moment, the right person, to reach out to with those gentle, insistent tendrils. And I wonder what would have happened if Elle and I hadn't pulled away that day. If we'd let those weeds pull us just a little deeper into the dark water. Story 8. I've been putting off writing about this for years. Even now, as I type this, my hands are shaking a bit. My racing buddies would laugh if they knew I was still freaked out about something that happened 5 years ago. But I can't shake it. I figure maybe sharing it here might help me process what happened that night on the road to Punta Penasco. I've been part of a Baja off-road racing team for almost 8 years now. We're not big time or anything, just a bunch of guys who love the adrenaline rush of pushing vehicles to their limits across some of the most unforgiving terrain in Mexico. My buddy Carlos and I were heading down for a pre-race recon trip. We needed to check out some route changes for an upcoming race, and we decided to take the coastal dirt road that runs along the Gulf of California, heading south toward Punta Penasco. This wasn't our first rodeo. We'd done plenty of night driving on desert roads, but this particular stretch was brutal. 5 solid hours of nothing but dirt, rocks, and occasional glimpses of the ocean when the moon was bright enough. No streetlights, no road signs, just darkness and whatever our headlights could illuminate. The nearest town was miles behind us, and cell service had disappeared hours ago. We set out around 7 in the evening, figuring we'd reach our destination by midnight. Carlos dozed off in the passenger seat while I drove, keeping my focus on the uneven terrain. Our modified Ford Raptor handled the bumps like a champ, but you still had to stay alert. One wrong move, and you could end up rolling into a ditch or worse. It was around 9:30 when I first noticed the lights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought nothing of it. Probably just another vehicle heading in the same direction. But something felt off. We hadn't seen another soul for at least 2 hours, and this road wasn't exactly a popular route, especially at night. The lights grew larger in my mirror, approaching fast. Too fast for these road conditions. I nudged Carlos awake. "Hey man, check this out," I said, nodding toward the mirror. Carlos rubbed his eyes and twisted around to look out the back window. "Who the hell is driving like that out here?" Within minutes, the vehicle was right on our tail, close enough that I could see it was some kind of truck or SUV with massive bar-mounted lights across the top. These weren't just regular high beams. They were those intense off-road LED arrays that can light up half a mountainside. And they were pointed directly at us, flooding our cab with harsh white light that made it almost impossible to see the road ahead. I flashed my brake lights, hoping they'd back off a bit. Nothing. The vehicle maintained its position, dangerously close to our bumper. If I had to brake suddenly, they'd plow right into us. "What's this pendejo doing?" Carlos muttered, still twisted around in his seat. "Can you see who it is?" I couldn't. The lights were too bright, creating a wall of white behind us that made it impossible to make out the vehicle's make or who might be driving it. I tried slowing down, thinking they'd pass us. They slowed too, maintaining that same uncomfortable distance. I sped up. They matched our speed perfectly. Carlos reached for the radio, but I reminded him we were out of range. "Try waving them off," I suggested. He rolled down his window and waved his arm, signaling for them to dim their lights or back off. The cold desert air rushed into the cab as he shouted into the darkness. If they heard or saw him, they didn't care. The vehicle stayed put, those blinding lights still bearing down on us. By this point, my nerves were shot. The road was getting rougher, with steep drops on the ocean side. Normally, I'd slow down for these sections, but with this lunatic on our tail, I felt pressured to maintain speed. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I navigated a particularly nasty stretch, the Raptor's suspension working overtime. "Maybe they're messed up on something," Carlos suggested, his voice tight. "Or maybe they think we're someone else." I had no answers. All I knew was that this game of cat and mouse was getting more dangerous by the minute. We were now pushing 70 miles per hour on a road that called for half that speed. One miscalculation, one unexpected rut or rock, and we'd be in serious trouble. For nearly 20 minutes, this continued. The endless desert stretched around us, the ocean occasionally visible as a black void to our right. No houses, no turnoffs, nowhere to lose them. Just our headlights cutting through the darkness ahead and those blinding lights behind us. Then, as we approached a particularly dangerous curve that I knew hugged a cliff overlooking the beach, I spotted a small turnout area, just enough space to safely pull over. In that moment, I made a decision. "Hold on," I warned Carlos, gripping the wheel tightly. I waited until we were almost at the turnout, then hit the brakes hard while simultaneously turning the wheel sharply to the right. The Raptor responded beautifully, sliding into a controlled skid that sent us spinning in a half circle before coming to a stop in a cloud of dust, facing back the way we'd come. The pursuing vehicle apparently hadn't anticipated this move. Its lights continued barreling forward, past where we'd pulled over, heading straight for the curve. I expected to hear screeching brakes to see them attempt the same maneuver I'd just pulled, but they didn't slow down at all. Carlos and I watched in horror as the lights maintained their speed, heading directly toward the curve that we knew overlooked a 30-foot drop to the rocky beach below. I braced myself for the inevitable crash, already reaching for the door handle, preparing to run to their aid, but the crash never came. Instead, we witnessed something that defies explanation to this day. The lights continued moving in a straight line, past the curve, beyond where the road ended, straight off the cliffside and over the water. For a split second, my brain tried to make sense of it. Had they somehow hit a natural ramp? Was there another road I didn't know about? Was I hallucinating from exhaustion? But then the lights did something impossible. They pitched upward, angling toward the sky, continuing their trajectory upward at what must have been a 45-degree angle. They shot up into the night sky, growing smaller and more distant until they vanished completely, like someone had simply switched them off. Carlos and I sat in stunned silence, the only sounds being our ragged breathing and the distant lapping of waves against the shore below. The dust from our skid was still settling around us, illuminated in our headlights. "Did you?" Carlos started, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," I answered, not needing to hear the rest of his question. "That's not possible," he whispered. I put the Raptor back in drive and slowly pulled back onto the road. Neither of us spoke for at least 10 minutes. What was there to say? We'd just witnessed something that couldn't be explained by any laws of physics I was aware of. Finally, Carlos broke the silence. "We don't tell anyone about this." I nodded in agreement. Who would believe us anyway? Even now, years later, I'm hesitant to share this story. People would assume we were drunk or high, even though neither of us had touched a drop that night. Racing was our livelihood. We didn't mess around when it came to reconnaissance drives. The rest of the journey to Punta Penasco was tense and silent. We arrived around midnight as planned, checked into our motel, and went to sleep without discussing what had happened. The next morning, it was almost like an unspoken agreement had formed between us. We wouldn't bring it up again. And we never did, not properly anyway. Sometimes when we've been driving those same roads for races, one of us might glance in the rearview mirror a bit more frequently. Once, about a year after it happened, Carlos simply said, "Remember that night?" And I nodded. That was the extent of our acknowledgement. I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize what we saw. Maybe it was some kind of experimental military aircraft with incredibly bright lights that happened to be flying low. But that doesn't explain why it was following us so aggressively on a remote dirt road. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion caused by exhaustion and the play of lights on the Gulf waters. But both of us saw exactly the same thing. The racing community is full of stories, tales of hallucinations during endurance races, weird experiences in the desert at night. But nothing comes close to what Carlos and I witnessed on that desolate Mexican coastal road. I still drive that route sometimes. Every time I approach that curve, I slow down and look out over the water, half expecting to see those lights again. Part of me wants to, just to prove to myself that I didn't imagine it all. But a bigger part of me hopes I never encounter whatever that was ever again. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and see headlights in my rearview mirror, I feel my heart rate spike. I watch to see if they're getting closer too quickly, if they have those bar-mounted lights on top. So far, it's always been just normal drivers on normal journeys. But I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, those impossible lights are still moving, chasing down some other unsuspecting driver on a lonely road, before breaking the laws of physics and disappearing into the night sky. Story 9. I still get goosebumps when I think about my years working at Raigmore Hospital in Inverness. I worked there as a night nurse for almost 15 years, and I've never spoken publicly about this until now. Something about those old stone walls held secrets that I still can't fully explain, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm not normally one for ghost stories or the supernatural. I've always been practical. You have to be in nursing. Blood, bedpans, and bureaucracy don't leave much room for flights of fancy. But when you've seen what I've seen, night after night in those quiet corridors, you start to question everything you thought you knew about life and death. It started during my second year at Raigmore. The hospital had this old wing that dated back to the 1930s. All narrow corridors and high ceilings, nothing like the modern sections. The night shifts were always understaffed, just me and maybe 2 other nurses covering 40 patients across different wards. That particular night in November, I remember the wind howling outside, rattling the windows something fierce. It had been snowing on and off, and the heating was struggling to keep up. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds, checking on Mrs. Donaldson, who'd come in with pneumonia. She was stable but elderly, and we were keeping a close eye on her. As I approached her room, I heard her talking to someone. Not unusual. Sometimes patients get confused at night, especially the older ones. But there was something in her tone that made me pause. It wasn't delirium or confusion. She sounded perfectly lucid. "Hello there, wee one," I heard her say through the half-open door. "Are you lost, dear? Where's your mummy?" I pushed the door open, expecting to find another patient who'd wandered in confused. The room was dimly lit by the small bedside lamp, and Mrs. Donaldson was sitting up, looking toward the foot of her bed. She turned to me with a smile. "Nurse Campbell, there's a little girl here. She shouldn't be wandering about at this hour, poor thing." I felt a chill creep up my spine as I looked around the empty room. There was no one there except us. "What little girl, Mrs. Donaldson?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while I checked her vitals. "The wee blonde girl in the red dressing gown. She was just standing there looking at me. Then she ran out when you came in. Couldn't you see her? Such a pale little thing." I managed a professional smile. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll go find her." That became our standard response over the years. I've said those words more times than I can count. I didn't think much of it that night, put it down to medication or confusion. But when I came in for my shift the next evening, I learned that Mrs. Donaldson had passed away unexpectedly around 5 that morning. Heart failure, they said. She'd been stable when I checked her vitals. I might have forgotten about it entirely, if not for what happened 3 weeks later. Mr. Fraser, a middle-aged man recovering from bypass surgery, pressed his call button around 3 in the morning. When I entered, he was agitated, pointing at the doorway. "There was a child here," he insisted. "A little girl in a red dressing gown. She just stood there staring at me, then ran out when she heard you coming." The same words, the same description, the same outcome. Mr. Fraser died before breakfast. After the 3rd occurrence, I finally mentioned it to Jean, one of the older nurses who'd been at Raigmore for decades. We were in the break room at 4 a.m., both of us exhausted from a particularly busy night. I was nervous about bringing it up, worried she'd think I was sleep-deprived or losing it. "Jean," I said, keeping my voice low though we were alone, "have you ever had patients mention seeing a little girl in a red dressing gown during the night?" The way she froze, cup halfway to her lips, told me everything before she even spoke. She carefully set her tea down. "So you've seen her too, then?" she asked quietly. "Not seen, heard about. 3 different patients now, all describing the same child." Jean nodded slowly. "It's been happening for as long as I've worked here. We don't talk about it, especially not with the new staff. They have enough to worry about." "But what is it? Who is she?" Jean looked around as if checking we were truly alone. "Nobody knows for certain. There's stories, of course. Some say she was a patient in the 30s, a wee girl with leukemia. Others think she's older than the hospital itself, tied to the land somehow. But what we do know is what it means when she appears." I already knew the answer, but needed to hear it confirmed. "They die, don't they, the patients who see her?" "Always. Usually within 24 hours. Sometimes just a few hours. I've never known it to fail." Over the next few years, I documented every appearance in a small notebook I kept in my locker. I never told anyone about my record keeping. It felt wrong somehow, too clinical for something so deeply mysterious. But I needed to make sense of it, to find patterns if there were any to be found. There weren't many. The girl appeared to the young and old alike, to the critically ill and to those we expected to recover. Men, women, different backgrounds, different conditions. The only common factor was that death followed her visits without exception. One night stands out more than the others. It was a stormy October evening, thunder crashing overhead as I made my rounds. The ward was unusually quiet, that heavy, waiting silence that sometimes falls over hospitals at night. I was checking on Mr. Mackenzie, an elderly man with heart trouble who'd been with us for almost 2 weeks. As I approached his room, I heard him speaking softly. My heart sank. I knew what I would find before I even opened the door. Mr. Mackenzie was sitting up in bed, his weathered face peaceful in the dim light. He was looking toward the foot of his bed and smiling gently. "It's all right, lass," he was saying. "I was wondering when you'd come. No need to be shy." He noticed me in the doorway and gestured me in. "Nurse Campbell, we have a visitor. Poor thing looks cold in just that dressing gown." I swallowed hard. "I'll go find her," I said automatically, but Mr. Mackenzie shook his head. "No need. She's not lost. She's here for me, isn't she?" I stood frozen, uncertain how to respond. In all my years, no patient had ever suggested they understood the girl's purpose. "What makes you say that?" I finally asked. "I know what's happening to me," he said simply. "I can feel it, and she's not here to frighten me. She's here to show me the way, I think." He looked back to the empty space at the foot of his bed. "Isn't that right, lass?" Then his eyes widened slightly. "Oh, she's running off now. Shy little thing." Mr. Mackenzie died peacefully in his sleep around dawn. His chart noted natural causes. His heart simply stopped. But I knew differently. He had been ready, and she had come for him. After that night, I began to see the girl's appearances differently. What if she wasn't an omen of death, but a guide? Someone to ensure that souls didn't have to make their final journey alone? It brought me an odd comfort, thinking of her that way. The most disturbing incident happened on a quiet Tuesday night in February, about 3 years before I left Raigmore. We had a young woman, Lisa, only 28, recovering from a routine appendectomy. Everything had gone perfectly. She was due to be discharged the following morning. I was making my final rounds before the end of my shift when her call button lit up. She was sitting bolt upright in bed when I entered, her face ashen. "There was a little girl," she said, her voice shaking, "standing right there, blonde hair, red dressing gown. She just stared at me, then ran away when she heard you coming. My blood ran cold. I'd become accustomed to the pattern by then, but this was different. Lisa wasn't terminal, wasn't even seriously ill. She was young, healthy, recovering well. I'm sure it was just a dream, I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. The medication can cause vivid dreams sometimes. It wasn't a dream, she insisted. I was wide awake. She was right there, as real as you are. I checked her vitals, all normal. Gave her something to help her sleep, promised to check on her again soon. I was rattled enough that I broke my own rule and mentioned it to Dr. Sinclair when he arrived for the early shift. "The girl in the red dressing gown?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. So he knew too. "But Lisa's fine, perfectly routine case." "I know," I said, "but I've never known the girl to be wrong." Dr. Sinclair ordered additional tests, but everything came back normal. Lisa was smiling and joking with the day nurses, eager to get home to her fiancé. I went home that morning with a lingering sense of unease, hoping that for once the pattern would break. It didn't. I came in that night to learn that Lisa had collapsed that afternoon while getting dressed to leave. An undetected blood clot had traveled to her lung, a pulmonary embolism. She was gone before they could get her to the ICU. Over the years, I became a reluctant expert on our spectral visitor. I noticed little details that others missed. She never appeared to patients in the new wing of the hospital, only in the original building. She never made a sound, no footsteps, no voice. Patients described her in remarkably consistent terms. Blonde hair, pale skin, about 7 or 8 years old, wearing a red dressing gown that looked old-fashioned. And she always ran away when nursing staff approached, vanishing into the hallway. Sometimes weeks would pass without an appearance. Other times, she'd visit several patients in a single night. There was no rhyme or reason to it that I could determine. The staff who knew about her developed our own ways of coping. If a patient mentioned the girl, we'd exchange glances, make sure they were comfortable, sometimes call in the chaplain for those who wanted one. We never told them what it meant, what would be the point. Instead, we gave them extra attention, made sure they weren't alone if possible. I left Raigmore almost 8 years ago now, moved south to Edinburgh for family reasons. I don't know if the girl in the red dressing gown still walks those corridors, still stands silently at the foot of beds in the darkest hours of the night. Part of me hopes she does, not because I wish death on anyone, but because I came to see her as a kindness, a guide, a promise that no one makes that final journey alone. I've worked in 3 hospitals since then. None of them have a little girl in a red dressing gown, but sometimes, in the quiet hours of night shifts, I catch myself glancing toward patient doorways, half expecting to see a small figure darting out of sight. And when patients die, as they inevitably do, I wonder if someone is there to show them the way, even if I can't see them. Story 10. I'm still struggling to sleep without a nightlight, and I'm 15 now. It's been 3 years since that weekend at Camp Whispering Pines, but I can't shake what happened there. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I was always the rational one in my friend group, the one who'd explain away the creaking floorboards or weird shadows. But what I saw that night changed everything for me. Our middle school organized this weekend trip to Camp Whispering Pines every year for the 7th graders. It was supposed to be this fun nature retreat about 45 minutes from town, where we'd do team-building activities, learn about local ecology, and basically get away from our phones for a weekend. I was actually excited about it. My best friends Emma and Zoe were going too, and we'd planned to claim bunks next to each other. When we arrived at camp that Friday afternoon, our teacher, Ms. Reynolds, led the girls in my class to our cabin, Pine Hollow. The boys stayed in a different cabin across the campground. Pine Hollow was this wooden structure that looked ancient, with weathered logs and those typical camp-style green shutters. Inside, it was pretty basic. There was a main room with maybe 12 bunk beds arranged against the walls. Off to one side was Ms. Reynolds's private room, then a bathroom area, and this smaller back room with 4 more bunks that nobody really wanted because it felt cut off from everything. Emma, Zoe, and I managed to grab bunks in the main room like we wanted. Emma took a top bunk, I got the bottom one beneath her, and Zoe was in the bunk next to us. I remember being happy about getting a bottom bunk because I'm terrified of heights. The cabin smelled like pine and that musty scent old wooden buildings get. The mattresses were thin and plastic covered, and the whole place creaked whenever anyone moved, but it felt cozy in a way. That first day and night were actually fun. We hiked, did a ropes course, made friendship bracelets, and had a campfire with s'mores. Nothing weird happened at all. At night, we did what you'd expect at a middle school girls' sleepover. Talked about crushes, told some lame ghost stories, and giggled until Ms. Reynolds told us to quiet down around 11. I fell asleep easily, exhausted from the day's activities. The second day was more of the same, canoeing on the lake, a scavenger hunt, dinner in the mess hall. Nothing unusual. We were all pretty tired by the time we got back to the cabin around 9:30 that night. A few girls stayed up whispering, but most of us crashed early. I remember checking my watch before falling asleep. It was just after 10. Then it happened. I woke up suddenly, completely alert in a way that felt unnatural. You know how usually when you wake up in the middle of the night, you're groggy and confused? This wasn't like that. It was like someone had flipped a switch in my brain from asleep to awake with no in-between. The first thing I did was check my watch. It was 2:07 in the morning. The cabin was silent except for the soft breathing of sleeping girls and the occasional creak of the building. I don't know why I turned over. I wasn't uncomfortable and I wasn't planning to get up. But something made me roll onto my other side, facing out toward the middle of the cabin instead of the wall, and there he was. Standing perfectly still in the center of the room was a boy. He looked maybe 10 or 11, with pale skin that seemed to have this faint glow in the darkness, like it was reflecting moonlight that wasn't actually there. He had short blonde hair and was wearing what looked like the standard camp uniform. Khaki shorts and a green Camp Whispering Pines t-shirt. But what made my blood turn to ice was his face. Where his eyes should have been, there were just empty sockets. Not bloody or gory like in a horror movie, just dark, empty voids. The skin around them looked normal, but where the eyes should be was just darkness, complete darkness. And yet I could feel him looking at me. Specifically at me, not glancing around the room or staring into space. He was focused directly on me. I couldn't move. I mean that literally. I was completely paralyzed with fear. I wanted to scream, to call for Ms. Reynolds, to hide under my blanket, but my body wouldn't respond. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I couldn't even blink as I stared at this eyeless boy just standing there, watching me with eyes that didn't exist. The worst part was that he didn't do anything threatening. He didn't move toward me or make any sound. He just stood there, completely still, facing me. That somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been moving around or trying to scare me. It was like he was waiting for something. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me frozen in fear, him standing motionless in the middle of the room. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt warped. Eventually, I managed to move my arm inch by inch toward my flashlight that I'd left on the floor beside my bunk. My fingers closed around it, and with a surge of desperate courage, I clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the center of the room, and he was gone. Just completely vanished. 1 second he was there, the next there was nothing but empty space where he had been standing. I swept the flashlight around the room frantically, checking every corner, but there was no sign of him. All the doors were still closed. The windows were shut against the cool night air. The other girls were all still asleep in their bunks. I turned the flashlight off, not wanting to wake everyone up. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. As I placed it back on the floor, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, I heard a whisper from the bunk above me. "Lily, did you see him too?" It was Emma. Her voice was trembling. "The boy?" I whispered back, my throat so dry the words barely came out. "The one with no eyes?" "Yes," she whispered. "He was looking right at you." That confirmation was both the most validating and most terrifying thing I'd ever heard. It meant I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't dreamed it or hallucinated it. But it also meant that what I'd seen was real. There had actually been an eyeless boy standing in our cabin in the middle of the night. Emma climbed down from her bunk and sat on the edge of mine. We were both shaking, whispering as quietly as we could. She told me she'd woken up for no reason and looked over the edge of her bunk to check the time on my watch, which was when she saw him standing there, facing my bunk. She'd been frozen, just like me. We sat there for the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. We kept the flashlight between us, ready to turn it on at the first sign of anything unusual. We talked about waking Ms. Reynolds, but were afraid of being told we were just having nightmares or playing pranks. At that age, the fear of not being believed can be almost as strong as the fear of a ghost. When morning finally came, we were exhausted. During breakfast, Emma and I tried to casually ask some of the counselors about the history of the camp. One of the older counselors, a guy named Mike, who'd been working there for years, mentioned that the camp had been around since the 1970s. "Any accidents ever happen here?" I asked, trying to sound just curiously morbid rather than genuinely terrified. Mike looked uncomfortable. "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering," I said, trying to sound casual. He hesitated before answering. "There was a drowning back in the 80s. A boy from the junior camper group. It was before my time here, but it's why we're so strict about the buddy system during lake activities now." My stomach dropped. "Do you know what he looked like? The boy who drowned?" Mike gave me a weird look. "I never met him. It was a long time ago. Why are you so interested in this?" I mumbled something about just being curious and walked away. I didn't tell him what we'd seen. I knew how it would sound. When we got back to the cabin to pack up, Emma and I told Zoe what had happened. She hadn't seen anything. She's a deep sleeper and could probably sleep through an earthquake. She believed us, though, which meant a lot. As we were packing, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On one of the wooden support beams near the center of the cabin where the boy had been standing, there were names carved into the wood. Most were typical camp graffiti. Kelly was here 97 and stuff like that. But one carving caught my eye. It was smaller than the others, carved with what must have been a dull knife. Tommy B, 1983. I don't know if that was him, I have no proof, but I felt it in my gut. That was his name, and that was the year he died. We left camp that day. On the bus ride home, Emma and I promised each other we'd never talk about what we saw to anyone else. We knew people would just say we scared ourselves with ghost stories or were trying to get attention. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without my lights on. I kept imagining those empty eye sockets watching me from the darkness of my room. I'd jolt awake at 2:07 in the morning, my heart racing, convinced he was standing at the foot of my bed. He never was, but that didn't make the fear any less real. 3 years have passed, and I've never been back to Camp Whispering Pines. I heard they renovated the cabins last year, tearing down the old ones and building new ones. I wonder if Tommy B is still carved somewhere in the new buildings, or if his mark on that place is gone now. But I know what I saw. Emma and I don't talk about it anymore, but sometimes she'll text me if she wakes up randomly at 2:07 just to check if I'm awake too. I usually am. I still don't know why he was there that night, or why he was looking at me specifically. Was he trying to communicate something? Was he just lost? Or was there something more sinister in those empty eye sockets that I was lucky enough not to find out about? All I know is that since that night, I've never again been the skeptical, rational person I once was. I now believe there are things in this world we can't explain, things that exist in the spaces between what we understand and what we fear. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, they find us. Story 11. I still can't explain what happened to us in the Durango desert last month. I've been putting off writing about it because part of me is afraid that acknowledging it might somehow invite whatever was out there back into my life. But I haven't slept properly in weeks, and I need to get this out. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Nothing fancy, just me, Carlos, Megan, and Jeff heading out to this cabin that Carlos's uncle owned. We'd been planning it for a while, talking about disconnecting, having some beers around a fire pit, and seeing the stars without city light pollution. The four of us have been friends since college, and with everyone's busy schedules, we thought this would be perfect. Carlos had described the place as rustic but comfortable, which turned out to be generous. The cabin was basically a wooden box with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with questionable plumbing, and a main room with a kitchenette. It sat on raised wooden stilts about 3 feet off the ground, with a small deck out front. But the location was incredible, completely isolated in the Durango desert, with nothing but sand, cacti, and scrubby vegetation as far as you could see. The nearest town was about 45 minutes away by car. We arrived Friday afternoon. The drive out there was beautiful but eerie. That transition where civilization gradually disappears and you're left with just empty road and wilderness. Carlos was our navigator since he'd been there a couple times as a kid. The last 20 minutes were on dirt roads that weren't even on Google Maps. My uncle hardly ever comes here anymore, Carlos mentioned as we unloaded the car. Says he's too old for the isolation, but he keeps it in the family. Jeff, always the practical one, immediately checked the generator and water tank while Megan and I unpacked food and supplies. Everything seemed to be working fine. We spent the afternoon setting up, exploring the immediate area around the cabin, and taking photos of the landscape. It was stunning, the way the sunset painted the desert in oranges and purples. We grilled dinner on the deck and opened some beers. That's when I first noticed something felt off. It was subtle at first. The silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, pressing kind that makes your ears strain for any sound. There was no wind, no distant traffic, not even insects chirping. "It's so quiet out here, it almost hurts," I said. Megan nodded. "Yeah, total sensory deprivation. My ears keep trying to find something to latch onto." Around 9 o'clock, as we were sitting on the deck playing cards by lantern light, I felt it first. A slight vibration coming through the wooden planks of the deck. so faint that I thought maybe it was just my imagination or my own heartbeat. "Do you guys feel that?" I asked. Everyone went still for a moment. "Feel what?" Jeff asked. "Like I don't know, a vibration in the wood." As soon as I said it, the vibration became more distinct, a rhythmic thumping that we could all feel through our feet on the deck floor. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, like someone gently but insistently knocking from underneath. Carlos frowned. "Maybe it's the generator?" Jeff shook his head. "Generator's on the other side, and it doesn't make that kind of rhythm." The thumping continued, steady at first, then gradually increasing in tempo. Thump, 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 thump. "What the fuck is that?" Megan whispered, pulling her feet up onto her chair. We all froze, listening, feeling it grow stronger. It wasn't just in the deck anymore. I could feel it coming up through the ground itself, like something beneath us was trying to communicate or break through. Carlos got up and went inside to grab a flashlight. "Let's check underneath," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. We all followed him down the steps and walked around to where the cabin was raised off the ground. Carlos shined the flashlight into the darkness beneath. I expected to see an animal, maybe a coyote or something that had gotten underneath and was pawing at the floor. There was nothing, just dirt, a few rocks, and the wooden support beams. "It's still happening," Jeff said, and he was right. The thumping continued, even though there was clearly nothing under there, causing it. We checked the entire perimeter of the cabin. Nothing. No explanation for the sound that was now reverberating through the entire structure. When we went back inside, it was even more noticeable. A pulsing vibration that seemed to be pressing against the walls and coming up through the floorboards. "Maybe it's some kind of desert phenomenon," I suggested weakly. "Like how the ground contracts when it cools at night." No one bought it, not even me. The rhythm was too deliberate, too intentional. It was Carlos who finally said what we were all thinking. "My grandmother used to tell stories about this area, about bad spirits." "What kind of bad spirits?" Megan asked, her voice tight. Carlos hesitated. "She called them brujas del desierto, desert witches. Said they were ancient spirits that guarded certain places. Said they would try to drive people away if they stayed too long. Any other time, in any other place, we might have laughed it off. But sitting there in that isolated cabin, feeling that unnatural thumping coming from nowhere and everywhere, none of us was laughing." "You're just trying to scare us," Jeff said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I wish I was," Carlos replied quietly. The thumping grew more insistent, faster now, almost angry. It no longer felt like someone knocking. It felt like something pounding to get in. We decided to try and ignore it. We went back to our game, turned up the portable speaker to drown out the sound, but it didn't work. The thumping adjusted, somehow finding gaps in the music to make itself heard, and now it seemed to be coming from different directions. From beneath us, then from the walls, then from the roof. Around 11, I got up to use the bathroom. As I passed by the window, I noticed something in the darkness outside. A light, or what looked like a light, moving across the desert floor, maybe 200 yards from the cabin. At first, I thought it was a car headlight, but the movement was all wrong. It was bobbing, weaving. "Guys," I called out, my voice surprising me with how shaky it sounded. "There's something out there." They crowded around the window. The light was clearer now, and as we watched, it split into 2, then 3 separate points of light. "What is that? Flashlights?" Megan asked. "No," Carlos said. His face had gone pale. They're too erratic, too fluid. He was right. These weren't the steady beams of flashlights. They moved like balls of fire, rolling across the ground in ways that defied natural movement. They would speed up, slow down, separate, rejoin, almost like they were dancing or hunting. "Those are them," Carlos whispered. "Las brujas, the witches." "Don't be ridiculous," Jeff said, but he was backing away from the window. "It's probably just... But he couldn't finish the sentence. None of us could think of a rational explanation for what we were seeing. As we watched, the lights began moving toward the cabin, slowly at first, then with more purpose. And as they got closer, I could see that they weren't just lights. They were actually flames, ball-shaped fires that moved independently, twisting and changing shape as they rolled across the desert floor. "Close the drapes," Carlos said urgently. "Don't let them see us watching." We quickly pulled all the curtains shut, but it did nothing to make us feel safer. The thumping had grown even more violent now, making the dishes rattle in the cabinets. It felt like the entire cabin was under siege. Megan was the first to break. "I want to leave," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't care if it's the middle of the night. I want to go now." Part of me agreed with her, but another part was terrified of what might be waiting outside. The lights, the witches, whatever they were between us and the car. "We should wait until morning," Carlos said. "My grandmother always said these things lose their power when the sun rises." We huddled together in the main room, away from the windows. The thumping continued relentlessly, now accompanied by what sounded like scratching on the outer walls. None of us slept. Megan, who I'd never known to be religious, pulled out a rosary she had in her bag and began praying quietly. No one teased her for it. In fact, it was strangely comforting. Around 3 a.m, I gathered the courage to peek through the curtains again. The fiery shapes were still there, closer now, circling the cabin like predators. They moved with an intelligence that chilled me to the bone. These weren't natural phenomena. They were watching us, waiting. One of them suddenly rolled right up to my window. I jerked back, but not before I saw it clearly. A twisted, burning shape that vaguely resembled a human figure, bent and distorted. It pressed against the glass, and for a split second, I thought I saw a face within the flames. Ancient, angry, hungry. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. "They're right outside," I gasped. The thumping reached a crescendo, so powerful now that it felt like the cabin might shake itself apart. The temperature in the room plummeted suddenly, our breaths visible in clouds despite the desert heat just hours earlier. None of us spoke anymore. We just waited, huddled together, counting the minutes until dawn. The fiery shapes continued their circling, occasionally pressing against the windows or walls, leaving no scorch marks but radiating a cold that seemed to seep through the wood. When the first gray light of dawn appeared on the horizon, the thumping began to subside, slowly at first, then more rapidly, until it stopped altogether. We waited another half hour, none of us brave enough to look outside yet. Finally, Jeff pulled back the curtain. The desert was empty. No lights, no movement, just the barren landscape turning gold in the morning sun. We didn't even pack properly. We just grabbed our essential stuff, locked the cabin, and practically ran to the car. No one spoke during the drive back. Each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. Later, when we were back in civilization and had cell service again, Carlos called his uncle. The conversation was brief, but telling. "He says weird things happen out there sometimes," Carlos told us afterward. "Nothing dangerous, he claims, just unexplainable. That's why he doesn't go anymore. Said he should have warned us, but didn't think we'd experience anything since it's rare. Rare, but real. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Because what we saw wasn't a hallucination or mass hysteria. Those fiery witches, those burning shapes that moved with purpose across the desert, they were watching us, testing us. And that thumping that came from the earth itself, like something ancient trying to surface. I still don't have an explanation. None of us do. We've agreed not to talk about it much, partly because we know people won't believe us, but mostly because saying it out loud makes it more real somehow. All I know is that I'll never go back to that part of the desert again. There are some places humans aren't welcome. Some ancient territories we've forgotten aren't really ours. And whatever guards that lonely stretch of the Durango Desert, whatever those desert witches truly are, they haven't forgotten their claim to the land, not for a second. Story 12. I still can't explain what happened to me 3 weeks ago. I've hardly slept since then, and I'm writing this at 4 in the morning because the nightmares won't stop. Maybe putting it down in words will help, or maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. I don't know anymore. I've been living in Harborview for almost 2 years now. It's a small coastal town that's packed with tourists during summer, but practically deserted from November through March. That's actually why I moved here. I wanted somewhere that had seasons of both activity and solitude. I work from home as a software developer, which means I spend way too many hours staring at a screen in my apartment. To stay sane, I started running at night along the boardwalk. There's something incredible about having an entire beach to yourself. During winter, I'd often be the only person out there, just me and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. The boardwalk stretches about 3 miles end to end, with old-fashioned lampposts every 100 feet or so, casting pools of yellowish light. Between those pools, it gets pretty dark, but that never bothered me. I actually loved the contrast between light and shadow. The rhythm of my shoes hitting the wooden planks, my breath forming little clouds in the cold air, the distant cry of seagulls. It was perfect. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday night, I went for my usual run around 11. It was colder than usual, maybe around 40 degrees, with a biting wind coming off the ocean. I parked in the main lot by the beach entrance, which was completely empty except for my car. I remember checking the time as I got out, 11:12, and noticing how bright the half moon looked reflected on the water. I started my usual route heading north on the boardwalk. The first mile was completely normal. I hit my stride, let my mind wander, and just enjoyed the solitude. At the 1 mile mark, there's this little ice cream shop that's boarded up during winter. I always use it as my turnaround point for a 2-mile run, or I continue past it for longer distances. That night, I was feeling good, so I decided to keep going. About a 1/4 mile past the shop, I first noticed something odd ahead. Between 2 lampposts, maybe 500 feet in front of me, there was a dark shape. It looked like a person standing completely still. At first, I figured it was just someone else enjoying the night view, though it was unusual to see anyone else out there in winter, especially that late. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was definitely a person, wearing what looked like a hooded jacket or coat. They were just standing there in the middle of the boardwalk, facing my direction. Something about the stillness was unsettling. People fidget, shift their weight, look around, but this figure was unnaturally motionless. I slowed my pace a bit, suddenly aware of how isolated I was. I'm not usually paranoid, but I decided to turn around. Better safe than sorry, right? I did a quick pivot and started jogging back toward the ice cream shop. After about 30 seconds, I glanced back over my shoulder. The figure was closer now, much closer, maybe 300 feet behind me. My heart jumped into my throat. There's no way anyone could have moved that distance so quickly without me hearing them running. The boardwalk creaks and groans under any weight. I would have heard footsteps that fast. But I hadn't heard anything except the waves and my own breathing. I picked up my pace, not quite sprinting, but definitely moving faster than my usual run. After another minute, I couldn't help looking back again. The figure was even closer, maybe 150 feet behind me now. And still, I hadn't heard a single footstep. That's when real fear set in. I started running full out, no longer caring about pace or breathing properly. The wooden planks thundered under my feet as I ran, but there was no corresponding sound from behind me, just silence. I couldn't understand how this person was gaining on me without making any noise. I reached the ice cream shop and flew past it, my lungs already burning from the sudden exertion. The parking lot was still over a mile away. I tried to focus on just moving forward, but the need to look back was overwhelming. When I finally did, the figure was less than 70 feet behind me. Close enough that I should have been able to make out facial features under the hood, but there was only darkness. Not shadow, not a hidden face, but a complete absence of features, like the hood was empty, yet somehow standing upright. I'm not ashamed to say I panicked completely at that point. The boardwalk suddenly seemed endless in both directions. Each lamppost I passed felt like it was taking minutes rather than seconds to reach. My car, parked at the beach entrance, might as well have been in another country. My legs were screaming, my chest heaving painfully as I gasped for air. Despite my terror, I kept checking behind me. Each time I looked, the figure had somehow gotten closer without seeming to move. 60 feet, 50 feet, 40 feet. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It was as if the figure only moved when I wasn't looking directly at it, like some twisted game of red light, green light. The last quarter mile to the parking lot was the longest distance I've ever run. Every muscle in my body was on fire, but pure adrenaline kept me moving. I could see my car now sitting alone under a streetlight. 20 more seconds and I'd be there. I allowed myself one final glance back. The figure was less than 20 feet behind me, still utterly silent, still completely still between my glances, and now I could see something else, or rather, the lack of something. Where its feet should have been touching the boardwalk, there was a small gap, maybe an inch or two. It wasn't walking, it wasn't running, it was floating. I hit the parking lot at full sprint, fumbling in my pocket for my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I pressed the unlock button repeatedly, the beep of my car like a lifeline in the silence. I reached the driver's side, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. I jammed the key into the ignition, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The engine roared to life, and I cranked the heater, even though I was drenched in sweat. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. As I put the car in reverse, I forced myself to look up through the windshield. The hooded figure was standing exactly where my car had been parked, facing me, motionless, silent, impossible. I slammed on the gas, the tires screeching as I backed out. I didn't even check for other cars as I swerved onto the road and accelerated away from the beach. The speedometer hit 60 in a 35 zone, but I couldn't slow down. I ran 2 red lights and nearly missed a turn to my street. The entire drive, I kept checking my rearview mirror, certain I would see the figure somehow keeping pace with my car. I reached my apartment building in record time, parked haphazardly across 2 spaces, and ran inside. I locked my door, then checked that all the windows were secured. I even dragged my dresser in front of the balcony door. Then I sat on my couch with all the lights on, unable to stop shaking. I didn't sleep at all that night, or much the next night. When exhaustion finally forced me to close my eyes, the nightmares started. In them, I'm always back on that boardwalk, running and running while the hooded figure gets closer each time I look back. Sometimes I dream that I make it to my car, but when I look in the rearview mirror, the figure is in my back seat. Sometimes I dream that I turn around one final time and finally see what's under the hood. I always wake up screaming before I can remember what I saw. I haven't been back to the boardwalk since that night. I've barely left my apartment, actually. I've ordered groceries online and told my friends I have the flu. I've considered moving away from Harborview entirely, but some part of me is afraid that whatever I saw isn't confined to that beach. The rational part of my brain has tried to explain it away. Maybe it was just some weirdo trying to scare me, or maybe exhaustion made me hallucinate. But I know what I saw. I know that figure moved without moving, advanced without walking, and stood without touching the ground. And I know with absolute certainty that whatever was under that hood wasn't human. I still don't know what would have happened if it had caught up to me. Part of me thinks that's why I can't sleep. My brain is trying to fill in that blank, creating worst-case scenarios in my dreams. But the other part of me thinks not knowing is better than the truth. I'm writing this at my kitchen table, with a view of the ocean in the distance. The boardwalk is just a thin line from here, the lampposts tiny points of light. Sometimes I think I can see a dark shape moving between them, but it's probably just my imagination. Probably. Story 13. I've never really shared this with anyone outside my friend circle. It's been 3 years, but I still get goosebumps thinking about that night at Osmansagar Lake. I'm only writing this now because I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. It was a regular Friday night in Hyderabad. My friends and I, Akash, Rahul, Deepak and I, Vikram, had just finished our semester exams and wanted to celebrate. We didn't have much money, so we decided to grab some beers and snacks and just hang out somewhere quiet. Someone suggested Osmansagar Lake because it's peaceful at night and we could sit by the water. We left around 11 at night. I remember checking my watch as we piled into Akash's beat-up Maruti Suzuki. The drive took about 40 minutes from the city, with us blasting music and talking about our plans after graduation. Everything was completely normal. We reached the main entrance of the lake around 11:45, but there was a police checkpost there. We weren't doing anything wrong, but they sometimes hassle young guys hanging out late, asking for bribes or just making things difficult. Akash knew a back route to the lake, a dirt road that wound through some trees, so we decided to take that instead. The road was bumpy as hell. Deepak was complaining the whole time about his back, while Rahul kept making jokes about horror movies where characters take shortcuts and end up dead. I remember thinking it was funny at the time. We parked about 100 meters from the shoreline in a small clearing surrounded by trees. The spot gave us a decent view of part of the lake and an old bridge that crossed a narrow section. The bridge was maybe 550 meters away from us, but clearly visible against the night sky. There was a full moon that night, so everything had this silvery glow to it. We set up our little area, pulling out a blanket to sit on, opening the beers, and laying out the chips and mixture we'd brought. It must have been exactly midnight when we heard it, an enormous splash from somewhere near the bridge. It was way too loud to be a fish or a bird. "What the hell was that?" Rahul asked, nearly dropping his beer. None of us answered. We were all straining to see what had caused the noise. "Let's check it out," I suggested, already standing up. I wasn't scared yet, just curious. We walked toward the shoreline, leaving our stuff behind. As we got closer to the water, I noticed how still everything was. No wind, no sounds from birds or insects, not even the usual gentle lapping of water against the shore. Just complete silence. That's when I saw it first, a figure on the bridge. At first I thought it was just someone else who had come to the lake at night, maybe another group like us. But something felt off about it. "Guys, do you see that? On the bridge?" I pointed. They all looked where I was pointing. The figure was glowing white, like it was reflecting the moonlight much more intensely than anything else around it. And despite being over 500 meters away, I could see it clearly. Way too clearly. It was a woman in what looked like a white sari. "How can we see her so clearly from this far away?" Akash whispered. He was right. We shouldn't have been able to make out any details at that distance, especially at night. As we watched, frozen in place, the figure moved. She walked to the middle of the bridge and then, I still can't explain this part logically, she passed right through the metal grills on the side of the bridge. Not climbed over, not squeezed through. Passed through, like the metal wasn't even there. Then we heard a woman's cry, a sound of complete despair that made my skin crawl, followed by another massive splash. "Fuck this!" Deepak shouted, already backing away. "I'm out of here!" Rahul and Akash immediately turned to follow him, running back toward the car. But I couldn't move. It was the strangest feeling, like my feet were glued to the ground. But it wasn't fear holding me there. It was something else, something pulling me toward the water. I started walking toward the lake, not back to the car. I could hear my friends yelling behind me, but their voices sounded muffled and distant, like they were calling from the other end of a long tunnel. In my head, I heard something they didn't, a woman's voice, soft but desperate. "Help me. Please help me. No one helps me." It felt like I was in a trance. I kept walking toward the water, my feet moving automatically. I wasn't scared anymore. I just knew I needed to reach her, to help her somehow. The voice in my head grew louder with each step, more desperate. I was ankle deep in the water when I felt hands grabbing me from behind. My friends had come back for me. They were pulling me, dragging me away from the lake, but I fought against them. I remember shouting, "She needs help. Can't you hear her? She's calling for help." They couldn't hear anything. Akash was yelling in my face, telling me to snap out of it, but I couldn't break free from whatever had hold of me. That's when Rahul slapped me hard across the face. The pain shocked me back to reality. Suddenly, the voice was gone. I stopped struggling and looked around, confused and disoriented. My friends were staring at me with genuine fear in their eyes. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Deepak asked, his voice shaking. "You were walking into the lake like some kind of zombie." As they dragged me back toward the car, I looked over my shoulder at the bridge. The figure was there again, in the exact same spot as before. I watched in horror as she moved to the middle of the bridge, passed through the metal grills, and jumped. Another cry, another splash. "She's doing it again," I whispered. "It's happening again, exactly the same way." "Just don't look at it," Akash yelled, pushing me into the back seat of the car. He started the engine with shaking hands and sped away down the dirt road, not caring about the bumps anymore. As we drove away, no one spoke. The only sound was our heavy breathing and the car's engine straining as Akash pushed it to its limits. We didn't even go back for the blanket or the food we'd left behind. When we were safely back on the main road, heading toward the city, Rahul finally broke the silence. "What happened back there, Vikram? Why did you walk into the water?" I tried to explain about the voice I'd heard, the desperate pleas for help that seemed to be directed specifically at me. None of them had heard anything except the cry before the splash. We drove straight to Rahul's place since it was closest, and none of us wanted to be alone that night. We stayed up until morning, too wired and freaked out to sleep. We tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. Maybe we'd all been more tired than we thought and had some kind of group hallucination. But deep down, we knew what we'd seen wasn't normal. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. While my friends wanted to forget the whole thing, I started researching Osman Sagar Lake online. What I found chilled me to the bone. The lake has been a notorious suicide spot for years. There were dozens of reports of people, particularly women, jumping from that exact bridge. One story from the 1980s mentioned a young woman in a white sari who jumped after finding out her lover had married someone else. According to the article, she had gone to the bridge several nights in a row, crying out for help, but no one stopped to help her. On the fifth night, she jumped. I've read about residual hauntings since then, supernatural replays of traumatic events that repeat over and over in the same location. That's what I think we witnessed, the replay of that woman's suicide. But what I still can't explain, what still keeps me up at night sometimes, is why I heard her voice when no one else did. Why did she call to me specifically? Why did I feel so compelled to go to her? What would have happened if my friends hadn't pulled me back? I've never gone back to Osman Sagar. My friends and I don't talk about that night anymore. When we hang out, we carefully avoid any mention of lakes, bridges, or late-night drives. But sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I hear that voice again. "Help me. Please help me." No one helps me. And I wake up in a cold sweat, feeling like I failed her somehow. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. 3 years later, I still have trouble believing it myself. But it happened. And whatever was at Osman Sagar that night, whatever connected with me, I think it's still there, repeating its tragic end over and over, waiting for someone who can finally help. Story 14. I can't believe it's been 3 months since what happened in Plumas. I haven't told many people about this because honestly, I'm still trying to process it myself. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe this will serve as a warning to others who love hiking like we do. My friends and I, Jake, Sarah, Megan, and me, had been planning this weekend camping trip for months. We're all in our mid-20s, work, desk jobs in Sacramento, and try to get outdoors whenever we can. Nothing crazy, just casual hikers who enjoy nature and getting away from our screens. This was supposed to be a simple overnight hike to this little alpine lake in Plumas National Forest that Jake had found on All Trails. The photos looked amazing, crystal clear water surrounded by pine trees, and according to the reviews, not many people knew about it. We left early Saturday morning, around 6, and arrived at the trailhead parking lot around 9. It was a gorgeous day, blue skies, perfect temperature, just a light breeze. The kind of day that makes you feel like nothing could possibly go wrong. The lot was nearly empty when we arrived, just 2 other cars. One was a newer Subaru, and the other was this beat-up old pickup truck that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. I remember noticing it didn't have license plates, which I thought was weird, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We got our packs ready, double-checked our supplies, and hit the trail around 9:30. The main trail was well maintained and clearly marked. We were all in good spirits, joking around, taking photos. About an hour in, we stopped at this little clearing to have some water and snacks. That's when this guy approached us from the opposite direction. He looked to be in his 30s, maybe early 40s. Average height, scruffy beard, wearing jeans, and these really worn-out hiking boots that caught my attention, because who wears jeans on a hike? He had a small day pack and a walking stick, but something about him felt off. He was too clean to have been out there long, but also looked too familiar with the area to be just a day hiker. "You folks heading to Emerald Lake?" he asked, real friendly-like. Jake told him yes, and the guy smiled in this way that, looking back, didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's nice," he said, "but if you guys want to see something really special, there's a waterfall about 2 miles that way." He pointed to what looked like a faint path branching off from the main trail. "Is it on the map?" Sarah asked. She's always been the cautious one in our group. The guy shrugged. "Nah, it's a local secret. The rangers don't mark it because they don't want it to get overcrowded, but it's worth the detour. You can still make it to the lake before sunset if you go see it." We thanked him, and he continued on his way back toward the parking lot. The 4 of us stood there discussing whether to check it out. "I don't know, guys," Sarah said. "I've never heard of these falls, and I've researched this area pretty thoroughly." Megan was on the fence, but Jake and I were curious. "Come on," I said. "What's the worst that could happen? If it sucks, we just turn around and get back on the main trail." God, I hate myself for saying that now. We decided to check it out. The path he pointed to was barely visible, just a slight parting in the underbrush that you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. It definitely wasn't maintained like the main trail. No trail markers, no signs, nothing to indicate it was an official route. After about 20 minutes of walking, the path got even less defined. We had to push through brush in some places, and I was starting to think we'd made a mistake. "Guys, I'm not sure about this," Megan said, stopping to pull a burr from her sock. "This doesn't look like a trail people use much." That's when we noticed the first cairn. You know, those little stacks of balanced rocks that hikers sometimes make. It was right ahead of us, perfectly balanced with 3 rocks. "See? Someone's been through here," Jake said, pointing to it. "Let's keep going a bit further." So we did. After another 10 minutes, we came across another cairn, identical to the first, then another and another. They were spaced out maybe 50 yards apart, leading us deeper into the forest. The thing is, they looked freshly made. The dirt around them wasn't settled, and there were finger marks in the dust on the rocks. After about 45 minutes on this trail, we still hadn't seen any sign of a waterfall, and the path was getting steeper and rougher. We were having to climb over fallen trees and navigate around dense patches of thorn bushes. "I don't hear any water," Sarah said, stopping to take a drink from her bottle. "Shouldn't we be hearing running water by now if there's a waterfall ahead?" She was right. The forest was eerily quiet except for the occasional bird call. "Let's give it 15 more minutes," Jake suggested. "If we don't find anything, we'll head back." A few minutes later, we came across yet another cairn, but this one was bigger, 5 rocks stacked almost impossibly. As we stood there looking at it, Sarah suddenly grabbed my arm. "Guys," she whispered, "I swear that wasn't there when we walked up." "What do you mean?" I asked, looking at the cairn. "Not that one," she said, pointing behind us. "That one." We all turned around. About 20 yards back down the trail was another cairn that absolutely hadn't been there when we walked past that spot minutes earlier. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. "Someone's following us," Jake said quietly. We all instinctively moved closer together, scanning the trees around us. That's when we heard it, the snap of a branch not far off to our left. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No response, just the rustling of leaves in the breeze. "We should go back," Megan whispered. "Right now." We turned around and started walking quickly back the way we'd come. That's when I saw him. The same guy from earlier, standing behind a tree about 30 yards away. He wasn't trying to hide exactly. It was more like he wanted us to see him. He was just watching us, not moving or saying anything. "Hey," Jake called out to him. "What are you doing?" The guy didn't respond. He just kept staring. Then we heard movement from 2 different directions. 2 more men emerged from behind trees ahead of us. They were dressed similarly to the first guy, jeans, flannel shirts, worn boots. But these 2 had machetes in their hands. "Don't move," one of them said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Just drop your packs and no one gets hurt." I've never felt fear like that before. My entire body went cold, then hot, then numb. Sarah let out a small whimper beside me. Jake stepped slightly in front of us like he was trying to shield us. "Take it easy," Jake said, his voice higher than normal. "We don't want any trouble." "Then drop the packs," the man repeated, taking a step toward us. I glanced at the others, and in that split second of eye contact, we all had the same thought. "Run!" Jake shouted, and we bolted. We didn't run back down the trail. There was no way past the men with machetes. Instead, we crashed through the underbrush to our right, running downhill, hoping to eventually intersect with the main trail. I could hear them behind us, shouting and crashing through the brush too. I've never run so hard in my life. Branches whipped at my face, tearing my skin. I tripped multiple times, scraping my hands and knees, but the adrenaline was so intense I barely felt it. All I could think was that I needed to keep moving. Sarah was just ahead of me, with Jake in front and Megan slightly behind. I kept looking back, terrified of seeing those men right on our heels. They were still following, but they seemed to be falling behind. Maybe they didn't expect us to run, or maybe they knew the terrain wasn't good for sprinting. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, we burst out onto the main trail. Without stopping to catch our breath, we continued running toward the parking lot. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like jelly, but pure fear kept me going. We finally reached the parking lot, gasping for breath and on the verge of collapse. The Subaru was gone. The only vehicles left were our car and that old pickup truck without plates. "Keys, get the keys," Sarah gasped. Jake fumbled in his pocket and unlocked the car with trembling hands. We all piled in, and he started the engine, tires spitting gravel as we pulled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw the 3 men emerge from the tree line, just standing there, watching us leave. We drove straight to the nearest ranger station, which was closed for the day. Next, we went to the local sheriff's office in the nearest town and reported what happened. The deputy took our statement, but I could tell he was skeptical. He said they'd look into it, but without any real evidence beyond our word, there wasn't much they could do. We never heard anything back from them. I still have nightmares about those men and what might have happened if we hadn't run. I check the trails compulsively now before hiking anywhere, and I've downloaded offline maps of every area I visit. I never go without telling multiple people exactly where I'll be and when I'll be back. But most importantly, I don't take unmarked trails anymore, no matter who recommends them. And I don't trust strangers in the wilderness, especially ones who seem too eager to send you off the beaten path. Those men were waiting for us. They had set a trap, and we walked right into it. I don't know what they wanted, our gear, our money, or something worse, and I hope I never find out. All I know is that if you're hiking, stick to marked trails, trust your instincts, and remember that the most dangerous animals in the forest walk on two legs. Story 15. I've always loved camping on secluded beaches. There's something magical about falling asleep to the sound of waves and waking up to a sunrise over the water. That's why when my friends suggested a weekend trip to a quiet stretch of beach in Alabama last summer, I was all in. Little did I know this trip would turn into the scariest night of my life. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Jackson, and our friends Ariel and Isabel. We also brought my Doberman, Bean. I've had Bean for 6 years, and he's the sweetest dog with people he knows, but protective when needed. I never thought his protective instincts would end up saving our lives. We arrived at the beach around 7 in the evening. It was later than planned because Jackson's car had overheated, and we had to wait for it to cool down. By the time we found the secluded spot we were looking for, the sun was already starting to set. The beach was completely empty, which at the time seemed perfect. Now it makes me shudder to think about how isolated we were. The spot we chose was about half a mile from the parking lot, far enough from any other campers to have privacy, but not so far that we couldn't get back to the car if needed. There was a small access road that ran parallel to the beach, separated by dunes, for maintenance vehicles and emergency access. We set up our 2 tents quickly, gathered driftwood for a fire, and started cooking hot dogs over the flames. Bean was having the time of his life, running along the shoreline and digging in the sand. Everything felt perfect. The stars were coming out, the beer was cold, and the company was great. Around 9, Jackson broke out a bottle of whiskey, and we started taking shots while sharing ghost stories, ironically enough. It was when Isabel was in the middle of a story about some haunted lighthouse that I first noticed the vehicle. It was an old dark-colored SUV driving slowly along the access road. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was park rangers checking the beach before closing, or other campers looking for a spot. But then it came back, and then again. Each time, it drove by at the same slow pace. "Anyone else notice that car?" I finally asked, nodding toward the road. Jackson squinted through the darkness. "Yeah, 3rd time it's gone by. Weird." "Maybe they're lost," Ariel suggested, but I could tell she was uneasy too. The 4th time the SUV drove past, it stopped about 100 yards away. We all went quiet, watching. Nobody got out at first, and we couldn't see inside because of the distance and darkness. "Hey, Bean," I called, and my dog immediately came to my side from where he'd been lying near the fire. I clipped his leash on, more for my comfort than anything else. "Should we pack up?" Isabel whispered. "Let's wait," Jackson said. "Might be nothing." We tried to go back to our conversation, but none of us could focus. I kept my hand on Bean's collar, feeling slightly safer with 70 pounds of loyal Doberman by my side. About 10 minutes later, I spotted movement. A tall figure had gotten out of the SUV and was walking toward our campsite. The way he moved was strange. He had a distinct limp that made his gait uneven and somehow more threatening in the dim light. "Guys," I said quietly, "someone's coming." Jackson immediately stood up, and I did too, keeping Bean close. We moved a few steps away from the girls, positioning ourselves between them and the approaching stranger. As the man got closer, I could make out more details. He was tall and thin, probably in his 40s, wearing jeans and a dark jacket despite the warm night. His face was gaunt, with several days of stubble, and his eyes, I'll never forget his eyes. They had this vacant yet intense look that made my skin crawl. When he was about 20 feet away, Jackson called out, "Hey man, can we help you with something?" The man stopped, swaying slightly. His gaze moved from us to our campsite, lingering on the girls, then back to us. "You're on my property," he said in a surprisingly soft voice. I felt confusion mix with my fear. This was a public beach. Nobody owned this land. "This is public beach," Jackson said, echoing my thoughts. "Alabama state property." The man took another step forward, and Bean growled low in his throat. I'd never heard him make that sound before, and it sent chills down my spine. "Been in my family for generations," the man insisted, his eyes now fixed on our cooler and supplies. "You need to pack up and go." I tightened my grip on Bean's leash. Something was very wrong here. This man was either confused, lying, or delusional, none of which made me feel better about the situation. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We checked the maps before coming. This is definitely public land. But we don't want any trouble, so if you could just—" I never finished that sentence. In one fluid motion that belied his limp, the man pulled out a hunting knife from inside his jacket. The blade caught the firelight, gleaming wickedly as he suddenly rushed toward Jackson. What happened next is still a blur. Bean lurched forward with a force that nearly pulled my arm out of its socket. I lost my grip on the leash, and in an instant, Bean was between Jackson and the attacker. The man swung the knife, but Bean was faster. His jaws clamped down on the man's arm, and I heard a sickening crunch followed by a scream of pain. The knife fell to the sand. The man tried to shake Bean off, yelling incoherently, but my dog held firm. "Bean, release!" I shouted, terrified the man might have another weapon. To my relief, Bean immediately let go and backed up to my side, still growling, his teeth bared. The man clutched his bleeding arm, his face contorted with pain and rage. "You're fucking dead," he spat, but he was already backing away. "All of you, dead." He stumbled back toward his SUV, still holding his arm. We watched in stunned silence as he got in and sped away, tires spinning in the sand. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sounds were the crackling fire and Bean's continued low growling. "Holy shit," Jackson finally said, his voice shaking. "Did that just happen?" Ariel was crying, and Isabel had gone completely pale. I knelt down to check Bean, running my hands over him to make sure he hadn't been cut by the knife. He seemed fine, already calming down as the threat receded. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Right now. He could come back with a gun or more people." Everyone agreed. Ariel called 911 with shaking hands while the rest of us frantically packed up our campsite. We left the tents half collapsed, grabbing only our valuables, food, and water. None of us wanted to spend another minute there. The half-mile walk back to the parking lot was the longest of my life. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle in the dunes made us freeze. Bean walked ahead of us, on high alert, his ears perked and his body tense. I've never been so grateful for an animal in my life. When we finally reached the parking lot, our relief was short-lived. Jackson's car sat alone under a single flickering light post, and even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong. As we got closer, my stomach dropped. All 4 tires had been slashed. The man had beaten us here while we were packing up. "Oh my God," Isabel whispered. "He's still here." We huddled together, scanning the darkness around the parking lot. Bean was growing again, his attention focused on a stand of trees at the edge of the lot. Was the man watching us from there, waiting for us to separate? The police arrived about 20 minutes later, though it felt like hours. An officer named Rodriguez stepped out, flashlight in hand. He checked the surrounding area while we explained what had happened. He found no sign of the man or his SUV, but took our description seriously. "This isn't the first report we've had like this," Officer Rodriguez told us as he helped check underneath Jackson's car for any further sabotage. "We've had complaints about a man harassing campers in this area for the past month, but he's always gone by the time we arrive." "He had a knife," Ariel said, her voice still shaky. "He tried to stab Jackson." Officer Rodriguez nodded grimly. "And you say your dog attacked him? Good. That might be enough to identify him if he seeks medical attention." The officer called a tow truck for us and stayed until it arrived. As we waited, he told us that this stretch of beach had become a problem area. Budget cuts had reduced patrols, and some locals had taken advantage of the situation. Some were just annoying, trying to scare people away from their beaches. Others, like our attacker, were dangerous. It was nearly 3 in the morning by the time we got the car loaded onto the tow truck. The driver offered to take us to the nearest motel, and Officer Rodriguez followed to take our official statements. None of us slept that night. We just sat in one room, jumping at every sound outside. The next day, we learned they never found the man. They checked nearby hospitals for anyone with a dog bite, but came up empty. Either he treated it himself or left the area entirely. It's been almost a year, and I still have nightmares about those vacant eyes and that knife gleaming in the firelight. I wonder what would have happened if Bean hadn't been with us. The man had clearly planned his attack, checking us out with multiple drive-bys, waiting until we were drinking and vulnerable, making sure we were isolated, disabling our car. He intended to harm us, all 4 of us. I believe with absolute certainty that Bean saved us from becoming a news headline, 4 friends murdered on Alabama beach. The thought makes me sick to my stomach. I've gone camping many times since I was a kid, always believing the biggest dangers were wildlife or bad weather. Now I know better. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the human ones, and they don't always look like the monsters you expect. I still go camping occasionally, but never in secluded spots anymore. And Bean? He sleeps on my bed now, not on the floor. That dog earned his spot and a lifetime supply of the best treats money can buy. Every time I look at him, I'm reminded that I might not be here if not for his protective instinct and sharp teeth. Some nights when I can't sleep, I find myself searching news sites for similar attacks, wondering if the man found other victims who weren't as lucky as we were. I hope not. I hope Bean hurt him badly enough to stop whatever sick plans he had, but I'll never know for sure, and that's perhaps the most terrifying part of all. Story 16. I still get chills when I think about what happened that night. It's been 3 months, and I'm still not fully over it. I've hardly told anyone the full story until now. I was on my way to visit my family in Minas Gerais. I live in São Paulo, so it's a pretty long drive, about 16 hours total. I usually split it into 2 days because doing it all at once is just too exhausting. This was back in August, right in the middle of winter here in Brazil, which isn't that cold, but gets dark really early. I'd been driving since 7 in the morning, and by around 5 in the afternoon, I was getting really tired. My eyes were starting to burn, and I kept catching myself zoning out on the highway. Not safe at all. I decided to find somewhere to stop for the night, get some sleep, and continue fresh the next day. I pulled into this gas station to fill up and stretch my legs. While I was paying, I asked the attendant if there were any decent hotels nearby. He seemed a bit hesitant, but then told me there was one just behind the station, down an old street that branched off from the highway. He said it wasn't fancy, but would be fine for one night. I thanked him and got back in my car. The sun was already setting as I followed his directions. I drove down this narrow, poorly maintained road that led away from the highway. After about 5 minutes, I came across this small town that looked like it was stuck in the 70s or something. The buildings were all old, many with faded paint, and there were hardly any people on the streets. It felt like one of those places that got bypassed when they built the new highway. The hotel was exactly as the gas attendant described it, not fancy. It was a 2-story building with peeling yellow paint and a sign that simply said, "Hotel" in blue letters. The parking lot was completely empty, which I found a bit weird, but figured maybe it was just a slow night. I was too tired to be picky, so I parked and grabbed my overnight bag. The moment I stepped into the lobby, something felt off. It was dimly lit, with just one small lamp on at the reception desk. No music playing, no TV, nothing. Just this heavy silence that made me instantly uncomfortable. The furniture looked like it hadn't been replaced since the 80s. Worn-out sofas with faded floral patterns and a coffee table with water rings all over it. I approached the front desk, but there was nobody there. I rang the little bell and waited. After about a minute of awkward silence, I rang it again. Finally, a door behind the desk opened, and a woman appeared. She looked about 50, with graying hair tied in a bun, and she seemed genuinely surprised to see someone standing there. "Oh, sorry to keep you waiting," she said, looking flustered. "We don't get many guests this time of year." I told her I just needed a room for one night. She nodded and had me fill out some paperwork, then handed me an actual key. Not a key card, but a real metal key attached to this bulky plastic keychain with the room number on it. Room 17. "It's at the end of the hallway on the first floor," she said, pointing toward a corridor. "Breakfast starts at 7 if you're interested." I thanked her and headed down the hallway. It was even darker there, with just a few wall sconces providing minimal lighting. The carpet was this murky greenish color that had probably been much brighter decades ago. As I walked, I noticed that many of the room doors had their numbers hanging crooked, and I didn't hear a single sound coming from any of them. Room 17 was at the very end of the hall, as promised. I unlocked the door and switched on the light. The room was small but clean enough. It had a double bed with a dark blue bedspread, a small sofa by the window, a TV that looked ancient, and a bathroom door to the right. Nothing fancy, but all I needed was a place to sleep. I was too exhausted to unpack properly, so I just dropped my bag on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and flopped down on the sofa. I took out my phone and started scrolling through some videos to unwind. The Wi-Fi was surprisingly decent, which was probably the most modern thing about the place. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was being jolted awake by a loud knocking on my door. I checked my phone. It was 11:15 at night. Who could be knocking at this hour? Maybe the front desk lady needed something. I got up, still groggy, and went to the door. "Who is it?" I called out. No answer, just silence. I hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door and opening it just enough to peek outside. The hallway was completely empty. I stepped out and looked in both directions, but there was nobody there. Weird. Maybe I dreamed it? But it had sounded so real and loud. I closed the door, making sure to lock it this time, and went back to the sofa. I was too tired to think about it much, so I set an alarm for 8 in the morning on my phone and moved to the bed. I fell asleep almost instantly. I don't know how long I slept, but I was suddenly awake again. There was more knocking at the door, louder and more insistent this time. I sat up, disoriented, and checked my phone. It was 2:43 in the morning. The knocking continued, and I felt a surge of irritation mixed with uneasiness. "Who's there?" I called out, louder this time. The knocking stopped abruptly. I got out of bed and approached the door cautiously. Looking through the peephole, I again saw an empty hallway. This was starting to freak me out. I opened the door, still keeping the chain lock on, and looked out. Just like before, there was absolutely nobody there. Now I was getting genuinely concerned. Once could be a dream or my imagination, but twice. I closed the door, put on my shoes, and decided to go to the front desk to ask if they'd seen anyone wandering the halls. The lobby was still lit by that single lamp when I got there. The same woman was at the desk, reading a book. She looked up as I approached. "Is everything okay, sir?" she asked, putting her book down. "Has anyone else checked in tonight?" I asked. "Someone's been knocking on my door, but when I open it, no one's there." She gave me a strange look, like she was trying to figure out if I was joking or not. "Sir, you're the only guest we have tonight," she said slowly. "No one else has checked in." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you sure? Could it be a staff member, maybe?" "It's just me on duty tonight," she replied, "and our maintenance man left hours ago." I stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. She must have seen the concern on my face because she added, "Maybe it's the building settling? These old places make all kinds of noises at night." I nodded, not really believing it, but not having any better explanation either. I thanked her and headed back to my room, feeling more uneasy with each step. The hallway seemed darker and longer than before. When I got back to my room, I locked the door and put the chain on. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe I was just overtired and my mind was playing tricks on me. Or maybe someone was messing with me, though I couldn't imagine why. I didn't feel like I could go back to sleep right away, so I just sat there in the darkness, the only light coming from the street lamp outside my window. I picked up my phone to check the time again, and as the screen lit up, it cast just enough light across the room for me to see, something that made my blood freeze. There was someone sitting in the corner of the bed. A dark figure, perfectly still, just watching me. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But when I adjusted the angle of my phone slightly, I could make out the silhouette more clearly. A person, crouched at the foot of the bed where the shadows were deepest. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure didn't move either, like it was waiting for me to notice it. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. That's when it moved. In one fluid motion, it stood up, and I could hear rapid footsteps coming toward me across the room. Pure survival instinct kicked in. I lunged for the door, fumbling with the chain lock and the doorknob, my hands shaking violently. I could hear the person running, getting closer. I finally got the door open and burst into the hallway, not even bothering to close it behind me. I sprinted down the corridor, nearly falling as I turned the corner into the lobby. The front desk woman looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. "Someone's in my room," I shouted, gasping for breath. "Call the police." She must have seen the genuine terror on my face, because she immediately picked up the phone and dialed emergency services. As she was speaking to them, I heard the main entrance door slam open. I turned just in time to see a figure dash out into the night. The woman hung up the phone. "The police are on their way," she said, her voice shaking. "What happened?" I tried to explain between ragged breaths, but it all came out jumbled and panicked. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. There were 2 officers who took my statement, while a third searched the hotel. They found nothing in my room, no signs of forced entry, nothing disturbed or stolen. The hotel only had 2 security cameras working, one in the lobby and one at the main entrance. The footage confirmed that someone had indeed run out of the hotel, but the image was too grainy and dark to make out any features. The officers pieced together that while I was talking to the front desk woman after the second knock, the person must have hidden in my room. Then when I returned, they waited until I was distracted to reveal themselves. As for how they got in originally, the police suspected they might have had a way to open the door from the outside or had been hiding in the room even before I checked in. I couldn't stay there after that. Even though it was now almost 4 in the morning, I packed my things and left immediately. The woman at the front desk didn't even charge me for the night. She looked almost as shaken as I was. I drove straight through until morning, stopping only when I reached a busy rest area where there were plenty of people around. I still have no idea who that person was or what they wanted. Maybe they were planning to rob me, or maybe something worse. I'll never know. What terrifies me most is thinking about how long they might have been in that room with me while I was sleeping. Were they the one knocking on my door? If so, why? Was it some kind of sick game? I've tried looking up information about that hotel since then, hoping to find similar stories or some explanation, but I haven't found anything concrete. All I know is that I'll never stop at an unfamiliar hotel in a small town again, no matter how tired I am. And I always check every corner of any room I stay in now, even in bright daylight. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night thinking I hear knocking at my door. Story 17. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened to me last winter. I've never told this story publicly before, but I need to get it off my chest. I had been planning a solo getaway for months. Just me, my thoughts, and the peaceful isolation of the Cascade Mountains in Washington. I'd found this quaint cabin on a rental site that promised seclusion and tranquility, exactly what I needed after a particularly rough few months at work. The photos showed a rustic wooden structure surrounded by towering pines with no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. Perfect. I arrived on a Monday afternoon. The drive up was gorgeous but nerve-wracking, with the narrow road winding through dense forest. My phone signal disappeared about 20 minutes before I reached the turnoff, which I expected. The owner had warned me, "Don't count on technology out there, that's kind of the point." He'd given me printed directions and a physical key, no digital locks here. The cabin was exactly as advertised: 1 bedroom, a small bathroom, a combined kitchen and living area with a wood stove, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It sat in a small clearing, with forest pressing in from all sides. The nearest town was about 14 miles away, down that winding mountain road. The first 3 days were honestly blissful. I hiked during the mornings, read books by the fire in the afternoons, and at night I'd sit on the porch with a beer, staring at more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. There was about 6 inches of snow on the ground, which made everything eerily quiet. The only sounds were the occasional crack of a branch under the weight of snow or the distant hooting of owls. On Thursday, my 4th day, everything changed. I was making lunch when I heard footsteps on the porch. At first I thought maybe it was a deer or some other animal, but then came a distinct knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the cabin owner had specifically mentioned that they never checked in on guests unless there was an emergency. I approached the door cautiously and peered through the small window beside it. A man stood there, bundled in a dark winter jacket with the hood pulled up. When I opened the door slightly, I noticed immediately how red his face was, like he'd been out in the cold for hours. But it wasn't just wind-burned red. It was an unnatural, almost feverish crimson. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice oddly flat. "I got turned around on one of the trails. Could you point me toward town?" Something felt off immediately. He was dressed for winter but not for hiking. His pants were denim, not waterproof, and would have been soaked from the snow. And his boots looked more like work boots than anything suitable for trekking through forest trails. Plus, who goes hiking alone this far out in winter without a map or GPS? But I told myself I was being paranoid. He was probably just some local who knew these woods and had taken a wrong turn. Yeah, I replied, keeping the door mostly closed. "You need to go back to the main road, about a quarter mile that way, then head east. It's about 14 miles to town." He stared at me for a moment without blinking. 14 miles, he repeated. Then nothing. He just stood there, looking at me. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I broke it. "Do you need to use my phone? I don't have service here, but maybe you could warm up for a minute." As soon as I said it, I regretted it. Something in my gut screamed not to let this man inside. "No," he finally said. "I'll find my way. Thanks." He turned and walked off the porch, heading in the direction I'd pointed. I closed the door, locked it, and watched through the window until he disappeared into the trees. My heart was still racing, but I tried to laugh it off. Just a weird encounter, nothing more. I went back to making lunch but couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see him watching me from the tree line. Around 4 o'clock, as daylight was already beginning to fade, winter days are short in the mountains, I decided to bring in more firewood from the stack on the side of the cabin. That's when I saw them, footprints in the snow circling the entire cabin. Not just passing by, but deliberately going around every wall, pausing at each window. My blood ran cold. These weren't from my morning activities. These were fresh, and they matched the pattern of the boots the stranger had been wearing. I followed them with my eyes. They came from the forest, circled the cabin completely, and then led up to my front door where I'd spoken to him. But instead of leading back into the forest where I'd seen him go, they continued circling again and again. He had been checking the cabin out, looking in my windows, testing if there were other entrances. I dropped the wood and ran back inside, double-checking every lock. The cabin had 3 doors, front, back, and a small cellar entrance, and 6 windows. I made sure everything was secured, then drew all the curtains. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage it. Should I leave? Try to make it to town? No, it would be dark soon, and the idea of encountering that man on the narrow road was even more terrifying than staying put. I tried to call 911, but as expected had no service. The cabin didn't have a landline either. I was completely cut off. I grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace, the only thing resembling a weapon, and sat with my back against the wall, facing the front door. Hours passed. The cabin grew dark except for the firelight. I couldn't bring myself to turn on any lights, afraid they would announce my location even more clearly. Just as my racing thoughts were beginning to calm slightly, it happened. Another knock at the door. Tap, tap, tap. My whole body went rigid. I held my breath, hoping whoever it was would think I was asleep or gone. "Hello?" The same flat voice from earlier. "I'm still lost. Could you help me? It's getting very cold out here." I remained absolutely silent, clutching the poker so hard my knuckles turned white. "I know you're in there," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "I can see your fire." Shit. I hadn't thought about the smoke from the chimney. "Please," he said, a new note in his voice that made my skin crawl. "Just let me in for a minute. I won't be any trouble." I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocking came again, harder this time. "I know you're alone in there," he said, all pretense gone from his voice now. "Nobody knows you're here. Nobody would know if something happened to you." Terror shot through me like electricity. How did he know I was alone? Had he been watching the cabin before today? The doorknob rattled violently, then silence. I counted to 100 in my head, then crawled to the window nearest the door, staying below the sill. Slowly, I raised just enough to peek out through a gap in the curtains. What I saw haunts me to this day. The man was standing perfectly still, just a few feet from the porch steps, staring directly at the cabin. Not moving, not walking away, just waiting. And the footprints. There were prints leading up to where he stood, but none leading away. He hadn't moved since knocking. How long had he been standing there? How long would he stay? In that moment, I remembered something. The cabin owner had mentioned an emergency satellite phone in a kitchen drawer for true emergencies, since cell service is non-existent out here. I'd forgotten all about it. I crawled to the kitchen, frantically searching drawers until I found it. By some miracle, it powered on. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher answered, and I whispered my situation, terrified the man would hear me through the walls. She assured me officers would be dispatched immediately, but warned it could take up to 45 minutes for them to reach me given my location. Those 45 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in the dark, poker in one hand, satellite phone in the other, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin. At one point, something hit the wall with a loud thud, like someone had thrown a rock or hit it with something heavy. I nearly screamed, but bit it back, tasting blood where I'd bitten my lip. Then silence again, complete, terrible silence. After what felt like an eternity, I saw flashing lights reflecting through the trees. Relief flooded through me so intensely I nearly collapsed. Police, thank God. I crept toward the door, ready to run out to their cars, when I heard shouting. A police officer was yelling commands. "On the ground, hands where I can see them, now!" My blood froze. He was still out there. The man had been standing outside my cabin this entire time. More shouting, the sounds of a scuffle. Then a knock at my door, different this time, authoritative. "Police, are you okay in there?" I checked through the window first. A uniformed officer stood on my porch, flashlight in hand. I opened the door with shaking hands. "Are you all right?" the officer asked, concern evident on his face. I nodded, though all right wasn't remotely accurate. "We've apprehended the individual who was on your property," he explained. "He was still positioned outside your cabin when we arrived." I stepped out onto the porch and saw two officers handcuffing the red-faced man and placing him in the back of a patrol car. His expression as they drove him away, that empty stare, will stay with me forever. The remaining officer told me they'd found a hunting knife on him, and a roll of duct tape, and a camera with photos. Photos of me taking firewood inside, reading by the window. Photos from earlier that day, before he'd ever knocked on my door. "He's been lurking around your cabin all day," the officer said. "Based on the tracks we found, he circled this place at least 7 times, checking every window, every possible entrance. Then he just waited." The officer stayed with me that night, and I left first thing in the morning. They later told me the man had a history of violent offenses and was wanted in connection with a disappearance in a neighboring county. I never found out what his full intentions were that night. Part of me doesn't want to know. But sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about those footprints in the snow that only went one way. About him standing there in the dark, watching, waiting for me to forget his presence or make a mistake. What would have happened if I'd opened that door the second time? If I hadn't found that satellite phone? If the police had been just a little bit slower to arrive? I don't do solo trips anymore, and I always check the doors are locked twice before bed. But what haunts me most is knowing that people like him are out there, watching, waiting for someone vulnerable and alone. And sometimes the only thing separating you from them is a locked door and blind luck. Story 18. I still remember that summer in Fairland like it was yesterday, even though it's been years. I was 14 then, just a kid thinking I knew everything about the world. God, I was stupid. Looking back, I realize how sheltered I actually was, despite growing up in a place like Fairland, Oklahoma. Fairland wasn't much of a town even back then, just a collection of buildings slowly falling apart, storefronts with faded signs, houses with plywood where windows should be. The kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do, but nobody really cares enough to do anything about it. My mom worked double shifts at the diner just to keep food on the table, and my dad had been gone since I was 8. Not dead, just gone, left for Tulsa one morning and never looked back. That summer, it was mostly just me, Mason, and Dylan hanging out. They were twins, but you'd never guess it looking at them. Mason was taller with this mop of dirty blonde hair that always hung in his eyes, while Dylan was stockier with a buzz cut because he couldn't stand the Oklahoma heat. What they shared was a recklessness that matched my own. We spent our days biking around town, shooting cans with slingshots, and sneaking cigarettes we'd steal one at a time from Mason and Dylan's dad's packs. The day it happened was hot as hell, probably mid-July. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the road and your t-shirt stick to your back within minutes. We'd been biking for hours, just cruising the back roads where hardly anyone drove anymore. I remember my legs burning, sweat dripping into my eyes, but I didn't want to be the first to suggest heading back. "Hey, check that out," Mason called, skidding to a stop where the pavement gave way to gravel. I followed his gaze down an overgrown dirt path that veered off into a thicket of trees. You could barely see it from the road, just a gap in the underbrush that didn't look natural. "Probably nothing," Dylan said, but he was already turning his bike. We rode down that path, branches slapping against our arms, until the trees suddenly opened up around this old house. Man, that place was straight up swallowed by nature. The gray siding was warped and peeling, with ivy climbing up one whole side. The front porch sagged in the middle like it might collapse any second. In the yard, there was this ancient Ford truck from maybe the 70s, more rust than metal at this point. "No way anyone lives here," Mason said, his voice dropping to a whisper, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. "Let's check it out," I suggested, trying to sound braver than I felt. We leaned our bikes against a tree and crept toward the house. The windows were filthy but intact, too grimy to see through. We tried the front door, but it was locked tight. "Around back," Dylan whispered, already moving. We found a bathroom window that was cracked open a few inches. Being the skinniest, I got nominated to go through first. Mason and Dylan boosted me up, and I wiggled through that tiny space, scraping my stomach on the window frame. I landed on the bathroom floor with a thud that seemed to echo through the whole house. For a second, I just sat there in the dim light, heart hammering. The bathroom was disgusting, mold crawling up the shower curtain, the sink stained brown. But what hit me hardest was the smell. Not just mustiness or rot, but something else, something wrong, like meat left too long in the sun. I unlatched the front door to let Mason and Dylan in. The three of us stood in the entryway, not saying a word, just taking it all in. The carpet beneath our feet was black with moisture, squishy in spots like it had been soaked for years. The floorboards underneath creaked and gave slightly when we stepped on them, soft with rot. But the weirdest thing was how the place looked like someone had just vanished. There was mail piled on a side table by the door, coats hung on hooks. In the kitchen, plates sat on the table with ancient food crusted on them. A coffee mug on the counter. A woman's cardigan draped over one of the dining chairs, everything covered in a thick layer of dust. "Dude, this is messed up," Dylan whispered, pointing to the living room where a TV guide from years ago was open on the coffee table, an uncapped pen beside it. "Let's look around," Mason said, already heading deeper into the house. We split up, which seems so stupid now. I took the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The first door I tried was locked, but the second opened to what must have been the master bedroom. The bed was made, but the sheets were stained with dark patches. A pair of men's work boots sat neatly at the foot of the bed. That's when I noticed the handcuffs. Just half a pair, actually. The cuff was fastened to a pipe running to an old wall heater. The chain had been broken like someone had yanked it apart with bolt cutters. Behind the heater, the wall was gouged with deep scratches, fingernail scratches. My stomach turned over as I realized what I was looking at. Someone had been chained to that wall and had clawed desperately to get free. I backed out of that room fast, nearly colliding with Dylan in the hallway. "You gotta see this," he said, his face pale. He led me to a small bedroom at the end of the hall, a little girl's room. Pink walls faded to a sickly salmon color, a child-sized bed with a tattered princess canopy. Dolls arranged on a shelf, their plastic smiles seeming sinister in the dim light. But the air in there, it was unnaturally cold, like stepping into a freezer, even though it was 90 degrees outside and the house had no electricity. Mason was already in there, looking at framed photos scattered on a dresser. He handed me one, a family portrait, a man in some kind of uniform, a pretty blonde woman, and a little girl, maybe 5, with curly hair and a gap-toothed smile. "Look at the toys," Dylan whispered. They were everywhere, untouched. A tea set laid out on a tiny table, coloring books open with crayons beside them, a stuffed rabbit propped against the pillow, like the little girl had just stepped away for a moment. "I don't like this place," I said, feeling a chill run down my back that had nothing to do with the cold air. "Let's see what's up there," Mason said, pointing to a string hanging from the ceiling in the hallway, an attic access. I should have said no. I should have suggested we leave right then, but I didn't want to seem scared, so I watched as Mason pulled the string and a ladder unfolded. He climbed up first, then Dylan. I followed last, my hands shaking so bad I nearly missed a rung. The attic was stifling hot after the cold of the little girl's room. Dust motes swirled in the beams of light coming through a small vent in the roof. And it was clear someone had been living up there recently. There was a sleeping bag rolled out in one corner, empty food cans and water bottles, a pile of dirty clothes, dog tags hanging from a nail hammered into a beam, magazines too, the dirty kind with women on the covers. And in another corner, stuff that made my skin crawl, a spoon blackened on. The bottom, a belt tied in a loop, needles. "Someone's been staying here," Dylan whispered, picking up one of the dog tags. "Let's go," I said. "Now." They didn't argue. We scrambled down the ladder and headed for the front door, no longer caring about being quiet. I just wanted out of that house, away from the handcuffs and the cold little girl's room and the signs of whoever had been squatting in the attic. We burst out onto the porch, gulping in the fresh air, and that's when it happened. The rotted boards gave way beneath my feet. I fell, but not just through the porch, through something else hidden underneath. I heard Mason and Dylan shouting as I plunged into darkness. I landed hard on dirt, the wind knocked out of me. Looking up, I could see a jagged hole in what must have been a piece of tin covered with leaves and debris, deliberately concealed. I was in some kind of cellar or pit beneath the house. "Caleb," Mason called down, "you okay?" "I think so," I wheezed, trying to catch my breath. "Throw me down your lighter." Dylan tossed his Zippo down. In the pitch darkness, I fumbled to catch it, then flicked it on. The small flame barely illuminated my surroundings. A dirt floor, crumbling stone walls. Some kind of root cellar, maybe. I moved the flame around, trying to find a way out. My hand brushed against something soft, fabric. I shifted the lighter to see what it was. I'll never forget what I saw. Never. Tiny bones, scattered and half buried in the dirt. Some still tangled in the fabric. A small dress with faded flowers on it. A child's dress. And there were more bones, adult-sized, deeper in the shadows. I screamed. I screamed so loud my throat felt like it was tearing. I clawed at the dirt walls, desperate to get out. Mason and Dylan reached down, grabbing my arms, pulling me up. Somehow, I made it out of that pit. We ran to our bikes, not looking back, not saying a word. We pedaled harder than we ever had, not stopping until we reached town. We split up at the main intersection, each heading to our own homes. I threw up in my backyard before going inside, then showered until the hot water ran out, scrubbing my skin raw. We never really talked about what we found, not in detail. Mason and Dylan moved away the next year when their dad got a job in Oklahoma City. I stayed in Fairland until I graduated, then left and never went back. Sometimes I think about telling someone what we discovered, calling the police or something. But it's been years now, and who would believe me? 3 kids breaking into an abandoned house, finding... what? I can't prove anything, and I'm not sure I want to go back there to try. But I still think about that house, the handcuffs on the wall heater, the little girl's room with its unnatural cold, the squatter in the attic with those dog tags, and the bones, those tiny bones tangled in a child's dress. I don't know what happened in that house in Fairland, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like I'm falling through that hidden cellar door again. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever terrible thing happened there is still happening somehow, beneath the surface, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it.